Good evening. I am Bernard Green, still chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is a special meeting of the Select Board for June 11, 2020. This meeting, as all meetings during this health emergency, is being held remotely. Today, for the first time, we will be using the Zoom virtual meeting platform. We are also required to tell you that this meeting is being recorded. A quorum of the Select Board is participating from their respective remote locations. Tonight's agenda includes the organization of the Select Board. Traditionally, after the election or re-election of Select Board members, we organize the Select Board by voting to select the chair for the upcoming year. This is not a legal requirement, but a tradition here in Brookline. But this year is an untraditional year in many ways. We are meeting virtually under the threat of a deadly COVID-19 virus. And on June 23rd, we will be holding a town meeting of well over 300 people, including town meeting members and others, using a virtual meeting platform, the Zoom platform. Our new Select Board member, John Van Scoik, I'm sorry, John.
Oh, you got it.
Oh, yeah.
You got it.
Would be asked to vote on the chair of the Select Board just 2 days after his election and before he has had time to get acclimated to the Select Board and its members and its. So John has asked to have the organizational meeting postponed until after town meeting. Mr. Van Scoik, would you like to say a few words regarding this?
Very briefly, I'd just like to say thank you to my fellow board members for understanding this request. And I would also thank those watching and the members of the public for understanding that someone who's just been elected to the board feels as though maybe a couple of weeks to get to know my fellow board members better in this context. They are all people that I feel I know pretty well already, but I don't know them as colleagues on the Select Board. And I haven't had a chance to sort of find my own comfort zone as a member of the Select Board. And the decision on the chair is going to be an important one. And we want to get it right. And we want to, as much as possible, get it to reach it together. And so I have asked for extra time until after town meeting for us to make that decision. And I thank the other board members who have gone along with that request.
Thank you, John. Any questions or comments from the board?
Yes, sure. You know, I'll just say that, I mean, if I were to vote favorably on this, I don't know that it would be because the new board member needs some time to get to know the rest of the board. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I think it would be because we've got a week until town meeting, and the idea of shifting gears right now, right before town meeting begins, while we're trying to figure out this budget in short time and everything. That's the reason I would vote for it, but I just don't want to make it a habit of new board members determining when we take this vote.
Thank you.
With love and respect, John.
and back at you.
I think I will comment that is also sound reasoning. I think in this year we do not have the same space between the election and town meeting, and so the obligations of the chair at town meeting are important, and the current chair has had time to prepare, whereas others have not. So I do think it's important that we do it after town meeting.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so I move that we postpone the organizational meeting of the Select Board until after the close of the June 2020 annual town meeting. All in favor? Ms. Heller.
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton. I saw her
You're
say
muted.
aye. You're muted.
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez.
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoik.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay. Next on the agenda are announcements, updates, and board comments. I'd like to start with a statement regarding a Black Lives Matter banner that will be erected on the lawn next to the town hall in the next few days. Afterwards, if other board members would like to make a statement or a comment, feel free to do so. Let me start by saying, E pluribus unum. This is the traditional motto of the United States. Out of many, one. We know that the many has not included African Americans, except as 3/5 of a person in the Constitution for purposes of apportioning seats in the House of Representatives. Recent demonstrations protesting the murder of George Floyd and the persistence of racism in many aspects of American life are, in effect, an addendum to the traditional model. That addendum, I think, can be said to say that now, e pluribus unum shall also mean that Black Lives Matter and that Black lives are an essential part of the many. So in that spirit, I asked the town administrator to install a Black Lives Matter banner somewhere in the vicinity of Town Hall, and a location on the grass next to Town Hall facing Washington Street was selected. All members of the select board indicated their support. This banner represents the town's commitment to improving the relationship between law enforcement and the criminal justice system in African American communities generally throughout America and in Brookline. The banner is also a commitment to address the persistent racism that is reflected in, among other places, the health and other disparities that is currently ravaging Black communities in this COVID-19 viral pandemic. The Black Lives Matter movement is an international human rights movement originating from within America and the African American community, which campaigns against violence and systemic racism towards Black people. It regularly holds protests speaking out against police brutality and killings of Black people and broader issues such as proposed radical reform of the criminal justice system and the elimination of all forms of racism. It began in 2013 with the use of the hashtag Black Lives Matter on social media after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of an African-American teenager, Trayvon Martin, in February of 2012. It became nationally recognized for street demonstrations following the high-profile police killings, including Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Eric Garner in New York, and continuing with demonstrations against the deaths of numerous other African Americans by police actions and or while in police custody, up to and including the death by asphyxiation of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on Memorial Day, May 25th, 2020. These incidents, and these are only among the ones we know of because of the wide availability these days of phone video cameras, have traumatized many Black people, especially young Black men who see these acts of violence on their TV screens and wonder whether they may be next. I actually know this from conversations I've had with my 25-year-old son, who has been lucky in not having negative encounters with police in Brookline or Boston, but he wonders if his luck will eventually run out. The phrase Black Lives Matter has become a statement used by people across racial, ethnic, religious, and political lines to express their distress seeing these images and to express support for the stated aims of the Black Lives Matter movement. The installation of the banner on Town Hall grounds represents Brookline's commission that yes, Black Lives Matter, and that we support those aims of the Black Lives Movement that include steps to end police misconduct, reform of law enforcement organizations, reform of the criminal justice system, and concrete steps to end racism and other forms of oppression. The installation of the banner on Town Hall grounds is also inseparable from our support for the efforts undertaken by the Select Board and the Brookline Police Department to address problems highlighted by the work of the Black Lives Matter movement that existed and may continue to exist in the Brookline Police Department and elsewhere. These efforts, these efforts help officers perform their duties with respect for the sanctity of life and with integrity, and guided by transparent policies and procedures in our police department's manual, and supervision, monitoring, and intervention processes that are designed to reduce the risk of police misconduct, disrespect, and disproportionate enforcement that the Black Lives Matter movement has highlighted. Look, let me be clear, we are not perfect, but residents of Brookline should know that the town of Brookline and the Brookline Police Department are years ahead of the problems reported in the national media, and that we are continuing our march towards a more perfect union. Please give us credit for that. Thank you. Any other select board members wish to make a comment about this or any other issue?
I'd be happy to.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks to the chair for your remarks, and I'd like to share some of my own on this. And I want to talk for a bit about the righteous uprising that's taken place over the last few weeks around the world and also right here in Brookline. I had the pleasure to join 2 protest marches in our town last weekend, one on Friday that was led by Brookline Youth, and another on Saturday that was led by Brookline Family. Both were multiracial and peaceful and powerful. Unfortunately, one was marred by the presence of unidentifiable riot police that were deployed, we're told unintentionally. That those riot police were deemed necessary to be there in the first place is emblematic of our relationship with policing and policing's relationship with us. Over the last week, this board must have received, 100 emails and many more calls and online posts and direct messages asking us to rethink our entire relationship with the police. And many of you have either read my post or heard me speak last week in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. I focus particularly on racial inequities in policing with special attention to policing in Brookline. And if you haven't read it yet, I encourage you to give it a slow read with an open mind. At the heart of that post is a truth that we seem to have lost, which is that a community holds the power to determine its own approach to community safety, which includes determining if and how police should be part of that approach. And clearly there are members of our community and those in neighboring communities for which Brookline's current model is simply not working. That those community members are most often Black is no coincidence. As I said last week, there's a centuries-long reason for this, rooted in causes that are external to policing as well as those that are intrinsic to policing. Beyond those of us that have been profiled, brutalized, and traumatized by inequitable policing in Brookline and beyond, we've also heard loud and clear from many white residents that changes in our policing are both necessary and urgent, literally a matter of life and death. And I'm glad to live in a community where so many people are ready to step up and actively challenge conventional systems which by design or neglect have taken Black lives and set nearly insurmountable challenges for those who remain. I outlined some near-term solutions last week, like fixing our broken police complaint process, getting body cams on every officer, dash cams in every car, and more. Some of these issues need to be addressed in the police contract negotiations, which are long overdue, and in which the select board and community need to take a more active role. Other critical solutions can be initiated through select board, town meeting, or school committee votes, and we should start planning for those immediately. At the same time, there's a need for a more meaningful process that brings all voices to the table and that prioritizes the safety of those who are most at risk, especially Black people. To meet this challenge, I've proposed the creation of a task force to reimagine policing in Brookline. This task force would be under the direction of the select board. I see 2 groups emerging through the task force, one focused on reform and the other focused on reimagining. The reform group would review our current police policies and processes through an equity and justice lens and solicit public feedback on those policies through robust community engagement. And then meanwhile, the Reimagining group would explore alternative models to community safety and policing being employed in municipalities around the world. They'd conceptualize new models that have yet to be imagined and hold numerous public forums focused on reimagining public safety. Both groups would make recommendations for meaningful changes that can be enacted by the select board, town meeting, school committee, or other relevant bodies, and make recommendations for legislation that should be supported at the state and federal levels. Other charges would be determined by community input. This task force will need to be diverse, transparent, and necessarily critical of our current model. We'll decide as a community how we'll move forward, but it's important that this task force provides a distinctly alternative vision of community safety that we can wrestle with and compare to our current approach, which so many of us agree is not working. I've shared this recommendation with the select board and requested that we docket a discussion on this as soon as possible. It's that critical and that urgent. Before I end, I do want to talk about one more thing, and that is that Black Lives Matter flag that's going up at Town Hall. I was asked what I thought about the idea, and I said I'm for it because I'm ready to implement policies and make investments that prove that Black Lives Matter in Brookline. That's what I've been doing since I got elected. But I also want to make clear to my fellow select board members and town staff that putting that flag up there is a commitment, and it's a commitment that this community will hold you to. For instance, as it relates to some of the matters that are going before the board right now, the flag won't mean much if we vote to cut funding to the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. We need to be investing in that office right now, adding at least one more full-time staff member and program funding to match. The flag won't mean much if we don't do everything we can to preserve the newest hires in our school department, a disproportionate number of whom are educators of color. We need to close the remaining $500,000 gap by redirecting funding from police or reserves. Flag won't mean much if we fail to contribute to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund this year, knowing that so much of our racial diversity resides in Brookline's affordable housing. We need to live up to our commitment of more than $700,000, which is needed now more than ever. And yes, that flag won't mean much if we don't end our appeal in the Gerald Alston case, which this town has already lost. There is no justice or honor in continuing the senseless fight with a Black man who was done wrong by this town and deserves to live out his days in peace. And finally, that flag won't mean much if we don't draw down our police presence in Brookline. We don't have to wait to start making investments in critical social services like education, housing, mental health, domestic violence prevention, senior services, and racial justice initiatives. We can start right now by making significant cuts in the millions of dollars to our police department and reallocating those funds in a way that matches the values of our community. A community that over these last few weeks has spoken loudly and clearly. It's time to listen to them, and it's time we act. To those in power in Brookline who say the right thing and do little, your platitudes are meaningless. It's your votes that matter. We'll be watching. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I didn't want to jump the line if there's other members that want to comment. But if not,
It's your maiden voyage.
I'll gladly weigh in. I just want to mention a couple of things that resulted from my experience of campaigning for this board recently. But first I want to thank Raul for speaking clearly and frankly on all of those issues. The story I just want to quickly tell is of a person who I had a conversation with this afternoon. And we were just kind of having a light conversation about some of the town meeting elections that just took place and our own experience with town meeting elections over the years. And the experience of realizing you're actually going to have to work at it to get elected to town meeting. You're going to have to go door to door and meet your neighbors and earn it. And as soon as I mentioned door to door, this individual who is African American said, "Not me." Think about that. Not me. It's ingrained in this person that going door to door would be a dangerous activity for him. He could be identified by someone looking out the window as someone dangerous in their neighborhood. Or he could meet hostility at the door. And this is, by the way, more than 40 years since this same individual confronted housing discrimination when he first attempted to move to Brookline. All those years, and there is still this persistent problem and reality, and it needs to be evident as much to people of color and to people such as myself, who are white and are challenged right now to do more than simply, as Raul just said, simply put a banner on a lawn. And so I think in that spirit, I know this board will move forward. I just want to add one other thing, which is, as much as we can't be naive about the persistence of racism in Brookline, we can't be dismissive of the progress that has been made. And we cannot be dismissive of the actual efforts that are ongoing, not just in the police department, but in many other departments in Brookline, to respond to the reality I just discussed and that Raul just discussed. And I'm glad that Bernard brought that up. Our chair brought that up. And so I would only ask that when we go forward on these issues, that people be realistic about the persistence of racism and also give recognition to the progress we've made, and then try to make more progress together.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments?
This is Heather. I am interested in hearing what the public has to say. I know that they are anxiously awaiting, and they've been waiting since probably before 5:30. So I will defer my
Next
time.
on the agenda.
I will defer my time to public comment.
Okay. Nancy, you have anything to say before we go to public comment?
No, I mean, I support a lot of what both John and Bernard and Raul have said. I think we need to do an examination. I have no problem with the task force. I do think people need to recognize that there are areas of, that the police function in social services. They are a front line against domestic violence. They provide services to our schools and to our kids. So we need to recognize all of the parts of the police department and focus on the ones that are not healthy. As far as the banner goes, I'm all for it. I think it's a statement that the town wants to work toward a more just society, and that this is really our goal.
Okay, let's listen to see what the public has to say. I will be allowing each person 3 minutes to make their comment. You can also continue to email us, of course, with your opinions. We do read those emails. I'm sure every board member does. I do. And we take into consideration those opinions that we can that are actionable by the select board. Devin Williams will let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining as you begin your comments. And I ask that you wrap up when that notice is given. Devin, do we have the first person for the comment?
Yes, so I just wanted to give the board and the public heads up that there are 20 people signed up for public comment at this time. The first person is Susa Kaldi, who I've promoted, and your 3 minutes is going to start now.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's very exciting to be the first at this, to have this opportunity. Dear members of the Select Board, I wrote down some of my comments, so I'm gonna read them out loud. I fully support Dr. Fernandez's plan for going forward, and I'd like to say a few specifics that I think is important to emphasize. So I've been a resident in Brookline for 11 years now, and I have 2 kids in the public school system. As a white person, I have been long aware of the many ways my white privilege has been present in this town and others. This included the fact that I never had to contemplate our town's fiscal responsibilities and priorities, and why do we spend so much on armed police officers as we do. But in this historic moment that we are in, I, along with many other residents, feel galvanized to speak up and think about these issues that our Black and Latino neighbors and representatives have been working on and thinking of for a long time. There have been several groups that have been formed. There's a 5-step plan, and there's another initiative called Call to Defund the Police that have been supported by hundreds of residents. I'd like to use this moment to specify one of the goals of these movements, and that is a 10% reduction to the police force budget going forward, going into fiscal year 21. 10% is not unheard of. It's not a lethal blow to the police department. It's something that a large organization can absorb. I found slightly different numbers on the various budget proposals that have been shared, but according to the latest one, what I saw was that we had a roughly $17 million budget allocated previous year to the police department, and the proposal was to add $500,000 to that. And I would say instead of that, we should be going down by 10% to something like a $15.3 million budget.
About 30 seconds.
All I wanted to say is that I urge the select board to use the savings that we may obtain by these reductions on spending on affordable housing and other community building initiatives. Thank you so much for your attention.
Next.
It's just going to take me 1 minute. We have 113 attendees in the meeting. The next person is Krista. Going to promote you to a panelist. All right, so you've been promoted.
Thank you.
And your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you for making the time for me. So I would like to emphasize when I start that I'm a white privileged male, and I have no history of civic engagement whatsoever, but yet I feel compelled to speak out today on behalf of police reform in Brookline. And that's really a confluence of two things that's driving that. One is personal experience with the Brookline police, some of which is on record with the town. And where on several occasions I experienced the behavior of the police that was more suggestive of a self-understanding of being a force with power in its own right, rather than being a service provider for citizens. And the second is recent events, and that culminated in the letter of Mr. Lipson to Mr. Green, explaining his reasoning for why he requested what he called crowd control units from the sheriff's office. And I think that letter that all of you and many others have read shows a deep lack of awareness and reflection on Mr. Lipson's part. And I think it is exhibit A for why there's a pervasive, substantial cultural, behavioral problem in the Brookline police force. And I think budgets should certainly be a topic of discussion, but we will not be able to fix this problem just looking at budgets. We will need to look at oversight and really imagine what is the goal for policing in Brookline in the 21st century? Is it kind of this old contract of we keep the bad guys out and you let us do whatever we need to do that? It's not my view for policing. in Brookline. I think we really need to think about an approach that is less militarized and more in touch with what this community needs. And I would encourage you to support Raul in his task force efforts and to pursue that effort with conviction and urgency, and really elevate this to something that is of high importance for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Devin, next person.
So the next person is Tina. Scroll down and find her. All right, Tina is being promoted to a panelist. You're able to unmute and share your screen if you feel comfortable.
Hi, this is Tina Boss. I'm asking for the select board to defund the police. It's not a fringe concept and it's not impossible. In this time of severe budget issues, we need the money and it's the right thing to do. Other things that were once thought impossible include voting rights, gay marriage, legalized marijuana. These are now commonplace. Other communities are having serious conversations, not just about abolishing the police, but specifically how they are going to do it. Brookline has the opportunity to be on the right side of history on this and to join with other communities in being a leader. It's up to us as a community to decide the systems of public safety that we want that actually keep us safe, every member of our community safe. We can systematically question the roles that gun-carrying police currently undertake, and we can determine better alternatives. Do we need gun-carrying police to respond to noise complaints, to block streets, to attend to road work? In terms of Select Heller's comments about police in the schools and with kids and frontline to domestic violence, we can find alternatives that would much better serve those functions. The Brookline police budget is $18 million. With the very real cuts that are still in the school and town budget, we need this money, much more than 10% of it. This is a crisis time, and this money can be better allocated to our schools and town. But it's not only a budget issue. Abolishing the police is also the right thing to do. To be a moral person now, to be an ally, we must record police interactions, especially those with people of color. That is crazy. But until the police is disbanded, that is what we are called to do. Policing, as we've been shown over and over, is untenable. I'm asking Brookline Select Board to be the modern day abolitionists, defund the police, make strong and bold cuts to the police in this budget now. Because in this time of crisis, we really need the money for higher priorities, and because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next person signed up is Jason. Jason, you've been promoted to a panelist. All right, and if you are ready, your 3 minutes will start now.
Great. Thank you for giving me the time and virtual space to speak at this meeting. My name is Jason Lofching, Precinct 12. I am speaking in favor of Select Board member Dr. Raul Fernandez's proposal to create a task force to reimagine policing in Brookline and reallocate funding from police to critical social services like education, housing, health, senior services, and racial justice initiatives. I am sharing one brief personal anecdote to explain why this is important to me and our town. I have Black friends living in Boston who avoid visiting my neighborhood because of past experiences and their heightened anxiety and stress when being in our town because either one, of being pulled over without merit, two, the fear of being pulled over by Brookline police, or three, the fear of being in my neighborhood because a neighbor's first instinct will be to call the police due to their implicit biases or just explicit racism. In fact, one time a Black friend visited, I stood outside in front of our building's parking lot before the individual arrived so that the person felt safe and comfortable enough to be in the area while we socialized. Therefore, we need a task force to review policing through an equity and justice lens that can lead to alternative models of policing, especially when interacting with Black, Indigenous, people of color, like my dear friends. This will require a need to consider new protocols and criteria for police response. If one of my neighbor's first instinct is to call the police on my Black friend, then there should be a system in place that prevents police from perpetuating my neighbor's explicit racism or implicit bias that can result in harmful psychological and emotional effects. If our town is seriously committed to increasing diversity and inclusion in our community, we need to find a better way to make Black, Indigenous, people of color feel welcomed. And it starts with tipping the balance of power away from police and our white affluent citizens, myself included, and towards folks like my Black friends who don't even feel comfortable visiting my town, let alone moving here. With the latest budget concerns that resulted in educators receiving pink slips and the ongoing mistreatment of Black, Indigenous, people of color by Brookline police, there's no better time than the present to reallocate our funding and reimagining what policing can look like when the police are genuinely serving and protecting our citizens. Because right now, the only ones the police are protecting and serving are themselves and white citizens holding all the power. Thank you again for giving me the time to speak.
All right, the next person signed up is Mariella. Mariella, you've been promoted to a panelist.
Ready? I can't hear you. Can you hear?
Hi, Mariella, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Let me start by saying that most of I could not have said any better than Raul Fernandez about the flag and commitment. And I want to share, I've been here before and I can tell you it's not a pleasure to keep coming back with the same unresolved problems. There is good faith reporting by the community and there seems to be shown no good faith action by town leaders and higher staff. We have been in droves before asking for the same thing, change, accountability at the police, et cetera. In 2009, there was a citizen complaint review committee that was set up by the board to improve the process for complaints against the police misconduct and abuse. Sadly, the result was that the committee made it worse. Voting members sitting at the board right now voted to make it so. Worse yet is that changes to the procedure are routinely ignored. Despite making you aware of that, nothing has changed. The crisis that has come to a head at the national level is the result of inaction and worse at the local level. Look at the retaliation against Gerald Alston, officers Pilot and Zerai Musgin, who had the courage to report racist conduct in the departments. They were ousted while those committing the bad acts kept their jobs and were even promoted. The numbers collected and published by the police are not followed up by you commissioners. As shown by town meeting member Ananian, 52% of non-residents stopped and questioned by police are Black. And according to his analysis, you are 5 times as likely to be arrested as a Black resident than as a white resident. It is outrageous. We're only talking about stops by the police that self-report. How many stops do they fail to document? Last year, Jonathan Margolis talked about how police stopped a Black man outside Walgreens for supposedly breaking into his own car. The town ended up paying him $157,000. The officers who stopped him never recorded the stop, and the town made the victim sign a non-disclosure agreement. That tells you how the town actually addresses racial profiling. That's the reality. Now, to address specifically the deeply problematic issue of outside riot police presence last week, here are my specific questions.
Marielle, you have 10 seconds left.
Why is the chief of police allowed to make decisions to bring officers from other communities or send Brookline officers to other communities alone with no green light from the select board? If Brookline officers go to other communities, who pays their overtime? If Brookline officers do something bad while in another community or jurisdiction, who are they accountable to? Who will discipline them? Let us know the answers, please. I am here. Despite my not believing in prior committees set up by the board before, I support Dr. Fernandez, who is the only one vocal and clear about what needs to be done, and who, by the way, was not a chosen insider. He was actually elected by the community, independent from circles of usual players. New thinking and new voices are our hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Rebecca Motner. You've been promoted to a panelist and you can choose to share your video if you feel comfortable and also unmute yourself.
Rebecca, are you you're muted. There you are.
Apologies for that delay. Okay, now working better. I had logged in on all chat device.
Okay, Rebecca, start speaking. We hear you.
Okay, I am logging in on a separate device.
We can hear you. Why don't you just speak?
Okay. Apologies for that.
Okay, why don't Devin? Why don't we come back to Rebecca, so she can get her equipment organized.
All right, the next person is Jesse Mermell. Jesse is being promoted to a panelist, and you can unmute yourself and use your video if you feel comfortable.
Thank you so much, members of the board, Mr. Kleckner. Thank you for the chance to share a few thoughts with you this evening. I join you tonight in light of the flying of a Black Lives Matter banner from Town Hall. And let me be clear, I fully support this. I've been so proud and optimistic watching and joining my fellow Brookline neighbors as they raise their voices these past 2 weeks, supporting Black lives and calling for change. Change is something that we know has to happen in Brookline. Racism lives in Brookline as it does in every community in America. You know, we've been wrestling with this for years and not always successfully. Like too many of us who are white and privileged, we've often been defensive and put the wrong goals and responsibilities at the center of our decisions. Few examples bear this out in clearer terms than the experience of firefighter Gerald Alston. 10 years ago, when I sat on the select board, I put the wrong goals and responsibility at the center of my decision-making when it came to Mr. Alston. It's why I stood in front of town meeting 13 months ago and supported the warrant article that issued an apology to him. That night, I said that for years, I thought of winning this case as the town racking up a W or an L in a lawsuit, and I no longer see it that way. We must redefine winning and frame it in terms of justice, in terms of our town, capital T and lowercase t, reconciling the self-satisfied vision we have of Brookline as a progressive beacon with the reality that we have work to do. And in terms of bringing those who have been hurt by our failures to the center of where we go from here. Legal outcomes aren't everything. Human outcomes, community outcomes are. That night, town meeting voted to apologize to Mr. Alston, but 13 months later, the situation remains unresolved. And I urge anyone who still may be looking at it as racking up a W or an L, a win or a loss in a lawsuit to instead frame it in terms of justice. As Brookline unfurls a Black Lives Matter banner from our most important public building, I have to ask, can our community ever truly live up to the words on the side of the building when the town still hasn't prioritized justice for Gerald Alston? When the town hasn't put his human outcome instead of its legal one? Town meeting did right, and now it has to come from town hall. I urge you all to end the appeal with Mr. Alston immediately if possible, and to end it in a way that results in a good faith and just resolution for Mr. Alston. Of course, as so many people have outlined tonight, including Select Board Member Fernandez, the conversation about race and Black lives in Brookline is not limited to this matter. We have to look at every policy discussion, the budget, zoning, schools, our educators, police, commercial growth, parking, affordable housing, and more, all through the lens of racial equity. The steps taken in this movement over just the last few weeks have been profound. Doing the right thing here in Brookline, earning the right to display those words on the side of Town Hall means that we have to take those very steps. A lot of harm has been done in the absence of a just resolution for Mr. Alston. And in that absence, the harm continues. I know that Brookline does not want the words Black Lives Matter to ring hollow here. I thank you for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight.
If I may take a personal statement or make a personal statement, as two members of this select board and multiple former select board members are still involved in litigation arising out of the incident that happened while you were on the select board. We've been winning at the federal court level. We still do have a appeal at the Civil Service Commission. I'm sure this board is going to be discussing that, but you know, there are two cases, one of which you were let out of, but one of which we are still suffering from and subject to personal liability. So
thank you for your comment.
thank you for yours. Ms. Williams. So is Rebecca Motner ready now?
Yes, thank you. I apologize for that difficulty.
It's a new world for all of us.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, members of the select board. And I did send a letter to all of you. I'll make this easier. Earlier this week. And just wanted to say here in this public forum that listening to friends who are Black and live in Brookline, I know their experiences with the police are very different from those of myself and my white friends and neighbors. People of color have told me how they're pulled over and harassed by Brookline police officers. One friend told me his friends deliberately drive around Brookline to avoid our local police. I'm here this evening to, along with many others, to urge you to appoint the task force to reimagine policing as outlined by your colleague Raul Fernandez. This should include a civil review board with subpoena power to investigate allegations of law enforcement wrongdoing. I'd like to say something not in my original letter, that for me, one of the most, as I've been thinking about what are the things, the structural policies we could put in place to improve things in Brookline, and I look forward to the results of a very inclusive process. I'd say for me, one of the most horrifying parts of George Floyd's murder was not just what Derek Chauvin did. It was that 3 other officers stood by and did not intervene. Even when dozens of people yelled and begged them to help George Floyd, they chose to protect their brother officer rather than an innocent Black man. I hope that as we reimagine policing in Brookline, we include creating a culture in which white people and people of color have an affirmative obligation to protect the lives of Black men and women. We all, ordinary citizens or non-citizens and police, do things we shouldn't, either out of malice and animus, or out of ignorance, or out of misunderstanding a situation. That last one, misunderstanding, was fatal to Breonna Taylor. Our police need to know that protecting Black and brown residents is more important than protecting fellow officers. We need to expect and train each other to intervene, to stop violence, and also to interrupt microaggressions. This culture change, which needs to happen in our police and fire department, but actually in every aspect of town, government, and civic life, will be one important aspect of a many-pronged effort to eliminate racism and repair the damage that racism has inflicted on all of us. Thank you for your support of this important initiative.
Thank you.
The next candidate for public comment is David Simon. You're being promoted to a panelist. David, you can unmute yourself and share your video if you're comfortable.
Okay, hi, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I've been a Brookline resident since 1994, and I was actually very proud to see what I interpret as widespread support for the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of so many people coming out for the protest, the peaceful protest. And I was happy to have heard Dr. Fernandez speak at one of the ones recently, and wanted to use my brief time here to specifically speak up in favor of two things of the many things, concrete actions he talked about. The goal of these two initiatives that I'm going to mention are to make sure that police face actual responsibility for their actions through fair and impartial judgment in the face of any complaints against potential inappropriate actions. One concrete action could be to appoint an independent investigator to investigate complaints, rather than having fellow police officers do that. And the second, as Dr. Fernandez also said, was to have body cams and dash cams. And these two actions would serve two purposes. One is just a sense of justice, that a complaint will be handled fairly and impartially. And the second is we may actually be able to see what happened. And the fact that we might be able to see what happened itself through the body cams or your dash cams could serve as a deterrent to inappropriate activity. And I think those two relatively small concrete actions can actually make a difference. Obviously, it's not enough, and I fully support the many other excellent ideas that Dr. Fernandez supported, but just wanted to speak up in support of those two specifically. Thank you.
All right, the next person for public comment is Katha. Katha is being promoted to a panelist. And your 3 minutes will start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. So many people have said so many things that I agree with, that I'm just going to read what I wrote earlier, which is very similar to what many people have said. I want to support Dr. Fernandez's call for a task force to reimagine policing in Brookline. The time is now for us to radically reimagine what safety in our community looks like and feels like. Now is the time to transform our community into one that prizes partnership and problem solving over violence and punishment. Brown and Black Americans have been loudly complaining for centuries about marginalization, poverty, stress, food deserts, poor education, lack of opportunity, but especially the disastrous effect of violent policing and excessive incarceration. But until this moment, the majority of white Americans didn't believe that police acted differently towards people whose skin has more melanin than theirs. No one can look away anymore. Videos of police beating and killing people of color captured on cell phone cameras over the past several years, culminating in a police officer casually suffocating George Floyd to death, has placed that violence on everyone's phone, computer, and TV screen. Indeed, the past weeks of protests have added considerably to those videos, with police beating, gassing, and shooting protesters of all races, peacefully demanding an end to police brutality. Even in Brookline, our peaceful marches were confronted by the threat of anonymous, overwhelming force. We need to change a system that enforces safety in one part of the community by systemically marginalizing and brutalizing another. Maintaining the safety and comfort of some should not require that the lives of others be destroyed. As the Gerald Alston case showed us, institutional power can and will assert its control by marginalizing people of color, even without force, and even when, from a moral and procedural standpoint, those in power have been told they broke their own rules and went against their own stated values. No more half measures of reform is going to be enough. Now is the time to reimagine the meaning of everyone, community, and safety. Now is the time to imagine a town without policing as we know it today, without that legacy institution of white supremacy we arm with guns and the authority to alter the course of a life simply because an officer feels threatened. In this time of upheaval, as we recover from the disaster of a global pandemic and its economic consequences, we have a once in many generations opportunity to reimagine our community, to reallocate money towards new and more equitable priorities. A task force to reimagine policing in Brookline would be a great first step. By taking that first step, we can begin the work of dismantling the institutionalization of white supremacy enforced by police training and policing policy, and build new institutions that allow every one of our citizens to feel safe and comfortable as they go about their daily lives.
Kathy, you've reached your 3 minutes.
That's good because I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next person for public comment is Dave Cavell.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Dave Cavell. I'm a Brookline resident and candidate for Congress, and I want to congratulate the new and really re-elected members of the Select Board and thank Select Board Chairman Green for proposing this display of a Black Lives Matter flag and for giving me an opportunity to speak in support of it this evening. We are weeks removed from the murder of George Floyd, a modern day lynching that horrified this country and the world. The only thing more horrifying than those 8 minutes and 46 seconds when a police officer decided to end George Floyd's life and his 3 fellow officers did nothing to stop it was the recognition that this has happened before. When we say George Floyd's name, we recognize so many more. Ahmaud Arbery and Eric Garner, Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Rodney King, so many more who are less well known, whose fates were not captured on video, but whose lives were also taken because of prejudice and racism and systems that allowed both to thrive. It's why Black people are not safe jogging or bird watching or driving or living their lives. It's the same reason communities like Roxbury and Chelsea have been hit hardest by COVID-19. Our systems in America create unequal circumstances that lead to unequal outcomes. For many in this country, particularly Black Americans, the murder of George Floyd was a painful reminder of what they have always known. For others, this was a wake-up call. We all must say Black Lives Matter because for hundreds of years, our country has not believed they do. That is why millions have taken to the streets to demand change, and I was proud to join my neighbors in Brookline at those protests. As President Obama recently noted, we must couple our protests with concrete actions in federal, state, and local governments. This flag will not end systemic racism in America or in Brookline. It will not end generations of brutalization and marginalization. We have to reimagine policing in this country. We have to reimagine what it looks like to live in a country that actually offers equal justice and opportunity to all. This banner must be coupled with actions to end police violence and militarization, qualified immunity, and racial profiling. But it is a symbol that here in Brookline, we are prepared to do the work necessary to root out systemic racism. When I worked with President Obama, he often quoted the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in saying that the moral arc of the universe is long, but bends toward justice. He would usually add that it only bends because we bend it. We are being called to confront 400 years of oppression and marginalization and murder of Black lives. No one action will be able to end that legacy or bend that arc, but we have to start. This flag is a beginning and it is not an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person for public comment is Ann Weaver. Ann, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you feel comfortable.
Hi, I'm Ann Weaver and I'm a newly elected town meeting member for Precinct 11. My Wi-Fi is shaky right now, so please let me know if you can't hear me. My question, okay, so far. My questions tonight are on possible additional budget cuts to the Brookline Police Department for fiscal year 2021. And I also have 2 questions about information that I in the PD report. Regarding the budget, As the police department is the highest departmental expenditure listed on the June 2020 budget table, $17.5 million, and is only receiving a 3.6% budget cut, I am interested in whether more budget reductions can be made there, both in keeping with our lower town revenues, as well as the nationwide momentum toward defunding oversized police department budgets. Regarding the PD salary budget, there is $12 million reserved for permanent full-time employees. How many full-time officers are in the department? How many part-timers are on staff? Is there available data on seniority and new hires? For example, how many new officers have been hired over the last 3 years by year? And how do we access that data? In addition to the budget, I'm interested in some other pieces of data I found in the 2019 year-end Brookline Police Report. On page 11, there is a line stating, the department also has 20 prisoners for various federal agencies. Is there more information about what federal agencies these people were held for? I ask because in 2017, a number of residents grew concerned when we discovered that the BPD was holding people for ICE. And I want to be sure that this is still not happening, as I thought we had resolved that. I am also, lastly, interested in learning more about the 46% increase in field interrogations last year and what the specific criteria is for acting suspiciously that would warrant such stops. Of note, out of the 38 people who were subjects of field interrogations, 14 were Black, 7 were Hispanic, and 1 was Middle East Indian. That totals 22 out of the 38, or approximately 58%, which is a significantly high percentage of non-white individuals who received such stops in 2019.
30 seconds, Ann.
I'd also like to know how these field interrogations differ from field contacts, as that seems unclear. Thank you.
All right, the next person we have signed up for public comment is Kimberly Richardson. Kimberly, you've been promoted. You can unmute and share your video if you feel comfortable.
Oh. You're on mute, Kimberly. Unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I actually had put in the comments that I had changed my mind, but since I'm here, I'll go ahead and speak. I didn't prepare anything. This is last minute. I'm a little frustrated just listening to a lot of the comments. But I'll talk about my experience and I'll be really, really quickly. I moved to Brookline and couldn't wait to live in Brookline in 2012. And my experience with Brookline and my son's experience in Brookline has been absolutely horrible, right? So I call it now lately, living Black in Brookline, right? And that's hard, right? Especially when you have 6 sons that you have to be afraid for because of the police. The first year we moved to Brookline, my son was simply walking down the street with a hoodie on and the police followed him around and followed him around. That's never okay, right? So then I had to tell my son, don't wear a hoodie, don't walk in Brookline at night. That's not okay. My next son, Brookline high school student, he's just walking his white friend home one day from school. Brookline police officer tells him, don't walk my daughter home from school. That's not okay. My sons shouldn't have to be afraid. I shouldn't have to send text messages out to my sons at night if they're not home, because they're adults now. Are you inside and are you safe? That should never be the case. And that's what it feels like to live in Brookline. So living in Brookline housing, we can defund the police and maybe do something better with Brookline housing, do something better with Brookline public schools, do something better with some mental health for the children that are going through so many things right now because of the pandemic and because of racism. I just want to say one other thing, and it bothered me a lot. One of the panelists made a statement and she said it was a misunderstanding. Like Breonna Taylor wasn't a misunderstanding. The way police treat Black people, it's not a misunderstanding. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Bonnie Bastian. Bonnie, you've been promoted.
Hi, everyone. Ooh, I'm glowing. Everything that Kim just said, that's hard to go after, but I'm gonna read my statement anyway. I'm compelled to make a statement today about policing and what I see in this moment, this groundswell of outrage and protest. I want to join Select Board Member Fernandez in saying that it's time for a new solution to these issues of policing that have existed since this institution's creation as a way to patrol enslaved people. I think that Brookline is in a unique position to take bold, brave leadership in this moment to move beyond our system of policing. Brookline has a good police department compared to many other police departments across the country, and I want to give it a bit of credit, but isn't it crazy that we have to say that we are lucky to have our police department, that we are lucky that they have not stepped on anybody's neck? And here's what concerns me. Chief Lipson's statement on Facebook regarding George Floyd's murder, while I appreciate this statement, it failed to use the word racism anywhere in it, which shows a lack of understanding of the entire point. To be able to make a statement about that murder and not use the term racism or systematic racism in relation to policing shows me that the police department does not have an understanding of racism. And that is what puts Black and brown people in danger. If you cannot see it, if you cannot call it out, you cannot stop it. This is what moves me to want to shift this budget around to reflect our priorities, our values in Brookline. Schools are clearly important. That's where most of our money goes. But second on that list is the police department, not health, not mental health, not affordable housing. In fact, affordable housing isn't even in the budget. This year's contribution to Affordable Housing Fund has been zeroed out at this point. Those are the elements. Those are the essential services that can build a community into something that doesn't require 21 officers per 10,000 people, which is what Brookline has. This is a lot more than other similar communities in the area have. And making the budget resemble a future that we want, one that supports Black and brown communities, that supports people that need mental health care, that supports people that have food insecurities. That's how you move towards a better Brookline with less policing. And I have one more thought around Select Board Member Fernandez's task force. As this task force to reimagine policing is being built, I want to encourage all of us to reframe this as a task force to reimagine public safety, because policing and public safety are not necessarily the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. The next person is David Clafter. You've been promoted to a panelist.
Hi, my name's David Clafter. I'm town meeting member from Precinct 12. I'm gonna try not to repeat too many of the statements that have been made, most of which I'm really in agreement with. I think there were a lot of eloquent things said. I'm also not gonna try to review the history of oppression of Black and brown people in this country or the desperate situation of inequality that we currently find. I think that's pretty obvious to anybody who has their eyes open right now. I do want to strongly support Select Board Member Fernandez's proposal for a two-part task force, one focusing on reform, one focusing on reimagining police. I think both of those approaches are very appropriate. Without prejudging the outcomes, I just wanted to make a couple of comments about some suggestions that have been made. Regarding dash cams, body cams, I think they're a great idea. I think in our negotiations of a new contract and disciplinary measures, it has to be viewed as a very serious offense with serious consequences if those cameras are not in use. It's the responsibility of an officer to have those working. Secondly, I want to make it clear that people are looking at the way the budget is formulated as an expression of our moral stance, of our view of what it means to work for racial and economic equality in this town. That too long, police budgets have been considered sacrosanct over other actually more important social needs. I fully agree with the statements that there's plenty of room to make substantial cuts to our police budget. And I would hate to see us making cuts to education, mental health, housing before we look at making cuts to the police budget.
You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's really all I wanted to say, except that I think the residents of the town are looking very closely at what we do. Our young people particularly are looking at what we do to see if Black Lives Matter banners are just wallpaper or if they really are a statement of what we mean. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person signed up for public comment is Emily Trelstad.
Hi, my name is Emily Trelstad, and I'm a very recent BHS high school graduate. I am here to speak in favor of defunding the police, and I fear that everything I say will be a repetition, so I just want to remind the select board and those watching of a few things. That police is rooted in slave patrol. The police operate as an agent of an oppressive and white supremacist state, and reform is not, will never be, and has never been the answer. Brookline is no exception to this. I was at a Brookline Black Lives Matter protest recently, the one where riot gear cops were brought out. I would like to remind folks that those riot cops did end up leaving, but they did not end up leaving until myself and other white folks, at the ask of Black protesters, formed a white line in between protesters and the police, and not before did they leave. And I just want to remind that Brookline is no exception. Brookline is not safe because of the grossly large number of officers that we have in this town, but because of the resources that we have to pour into our community, including education, and that's where budget and money allocation needs to go the most. We need to not rethink or reimagine necessarily the policing, but reimagine public safety, and if police even need to fit into that. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. The next person we have signed up is Carrie Ann Tester. Carrie Ann, you're being promoted to a panelist.
Okay.
And we can
you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
And your 3 minutes will start now.
Okay, hi. So I'm Carrie Ann Tester. I live on Walnut Street. I just wanted to read a pretty brief email that I sent earlier to the select board and add a couple of things at the beginning and the end. So I grew up in South Carolina, and with tremendous regret, I will second what Chair Green's assessment of the Brookline Police Department as being years, if not decades, ahead of many others in this country. I'd also encourage my fellow white people to use your privilege to do whatever you can, no matter how small it might feel, to support our brothers and sisters of color in their calls for genuine and demonstrated equity and support, respect, So I'm seconding a lot of the stuff we've heard tonight for the reallocation of funds away from traditional policing to more social supports, radical restructuring with the police department. And instead of my own words, I'd like to read some words from Philip Atiba Goff, who answered some of the questions that I had when I first started thinking about this. It's actually about not having no police, defunding the police, but making sure that the communities have the resources so that you can have less of a footprint of police. I'll give you an example. He said, lots of people have been asking me for the last couple of days, if we defund the police, what happens when you call 911? And what I say back is, well, if something's on fire, what number do you call? You call 911. And who shows up? It's the fire truck. And if someone's having a heart attack, you call 911 and the EMT shows up. So we already have 911 giving lots of different emergency services. Imagine what would happen if when someone was overdosing or when a couple was having a disagreement that they didn't know how to resolve, or when a kid wasn't feeling safe. If you could call mental health resources, child protective resources, substance abuse resources, if the resources that folks needed so they didn't need to rely on law enforcement were there, if 911 had more options, communities would feel safer and you wouldn't be introducing a badge and a gun to situations that law enforcement can never be trained to manage in the first place and that they've been calling to get out of the business of for years. That's what the majority of protesters and activists I talk to say they want. They want more options for 911. They want more resources for communities so communities make the decision about when something has gotten violent enough that a badge and a gun is appropriate. And as a social worker here in Brookline, I specialize in older adults and end of life. By the way, that's the end of the quote. I know that
30 seconds, Carrie.
Thanks. I know that the Brookline Police Department quite often relies on the on-call social worker from the town's Council on Aging in cases where social work skills can help solve the problem. Why not eliminate the middleman in cases like these and develop and expand a well-oiled triage system for public support that doesn't ask the police to be the entry point for all of our social ills? We can do better, and let's do better.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. Next we have Alyssa Rose. You've been promoted to a panelist. Oh, Alyssa, you're muted.
You're muted, Alyssa.
Thank you for that. I have a quick question first. If I finish right before my 3 minutes, would that allow you guys to respond to some of the questions that I have?
We generally don't respond to questions during the comment period, but you can ask them and maybe send them to us by email and we'll respond.
Great, thanks. Sorry, this is my first time doing this. Okay, so I am or was a Brookline teacher of 6 years, and I just got my RIF notice 2 weeks ago. So I'm trying to understand a little bit of the town's budget more. So I've read multiple news reports that a key driver to the decision of not to draw more money from the rainy day fund to support Brookline schools is due to comments surrounding the current municipal debt and maintenance of the town's AAA bond rating. If this is true, why is this such a concern? Is there a sense for the difference in percentage of interest rate from AAA to a AA municipal rating? And is this a difference in percentage really worth risking our town and its reputation for? Prior to this meeting, I was listening to the school committee meeting where it was stated that up to $500,000 is proposed to be allocated from the rainy day fund to help fund the schools this year, even though the school committee has still has about $1.1 million deficit to make up. Multiple school committee members were concerned that $500,000 will not be enough. Their concern is understandable because about 2 weeks ago, the school committee handed out over 360 pink slips to classroom teachers. I was one of them. There are 625 classroom teachers in Brookline. This caused immediate backlash from the community, and as I understand it, most are being hired back, yet a lot of us, there have only been 120 who have actually received that notice. From what I've researched, Brookline is running an annual account deficit that is forecasted to grow 5-fold in the next 5 years. Wouldn't a more thoughtful financial approach consider long-term stability with improved revenue generation and stable municipal and residential asset values? Given that most municipal loans are revenue-backed, shouldn't we be focusing on the revenue component of the coverage ratios rather than the cost component? And I think the biggest thing I take away from this is what concerns me most is that I feel a town of Brookline's metrics of town financial success don't match up with the reality of its success, which I view to be its schools.
Thank you. Some of your questions will be answered during our budget discussion, but why don't you email those questions to us and we'll answer them. It's not appropriate to do it right now.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. The next person we have signed up for public comment is Noah. Noah, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute yourself and share your video.
Thank you. I'm here to express my support for Board Member Fernandez's proposed task force to reimagine policing in Brookline. Board members Green and Vanskoik's statements on the BPD's motions towards progressivism are correct. We are not as bad as other towns, but that is damnation by faint praise. As other commenters have stated, Brookline clearly still has serious issues around race and transparency. The racism of our department is insidious and covered with superficial symbols like BLM banners. Every Black family in our town has a story with the police. There is no excuse to be satisfied with our present system when we know how much work remains. We need to deprioritize and disempower our police force and reassess what our community truly needs and how we allocate our resources. A perfect illustration of this can be seen looking at the excesses of overtime in the BPD. In 2019, all but 3 of the 25 highest paid public officials worked for Brookline Police, all making well above $200,000. 16 of these individuals were patrol officers. Why are patrol officers making more than Ben Loomis? Why are we trying to buy the BPD a new motorcycle? And why are we sending officers to K-9 Training Academy? We must be focusing these resources on community development, led by voices within the community. Instead of briefly training officers to do the jobs of social workers, we need social workers to be trained as public servants. There is no reason a responder to a nonviolent call should carry a gun. The police simply should not be responsible for most of the issues they are, and I hope the task force can be part of dismantling the institutional racism and lack of accountability that still exists in the Brookline Police Department, and focusing on the things our community really needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. The next person is Emma.
Nice job. Are you shaking?
What?
Are you shaking?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Emma Nash. I graduated from BHS in 2014, and I currently live in Coolidge Corner. It is heartening to see so many Brookline residents taking up the question of police accountability. I, like many others, would specifically like to thank Select Board member Raul Fernandez for his leadership around this issue. At the same time, it is frustrating that this larger moment of reckoning in Brookline, if I can call it that, comes after oh so many years of testimony from Black residents, residents of color, and even Black officers. Right now, many people in our community and in our country are questioning not only how we can reform policing, but also the role of police and of policing itself in maintaining public safety. Personally, I do not believe that this is an institution that can be reformed, but that's up for debate. I don't know. Protesters, activists, and scholars have focused our attention on city and municipal budgets, which very often allocate more funding to police, including through well-intentioned but ineffective attempts at reform, than to programs that provide for public safety by first providing for the public good. It is my hope that we will do the same here in Brookline, beginning with the budget for 2021. At minimum, however, we should consider cuts to police funding that might close the remaining budget gap in Brookline schools and restore funding to the Department of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. We can start by asking ourselves if we really need more officers on the streets than our neighbors in Newton, Somerville, and Needham, all 3 of which have about 2/3 as many officers for every 10,000 residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. The next person is Alex. Alex, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can share your video and unmute yourself.
Thanks. Hello. Hi. I had my notes written in the chat and now I can't see them anymore, but I will try and, there they are. Okay. So I'm speaking in support of all 3 of the proposals put forward by Select Board member Fernandez. And I want to thank him for his leadership on this, as others have done. And for his courage in coming out to the protests. I kind of wished that I had seen more of you there. Maybe you were at some of the other protests. In terms of the police oversight and a non-police independent investigator for complaints, I think that's especially important. And I think I haven't been clear on all of the details of the proposal, but I want to make sure that whatever we pass, there's actually teeth in it to be able to discipline, or if we need to fire police officers who conduct misconduct or have a pattern of misconduct, and who have a pattern of negative interactions with people of color. I understand that there are a lot of structural impediments to that. In terms of the body cams and dash cams, as a Brookline teacher who uses video regularly of my own lessons to reflect on my own teaching, I find it one of the most valuable tools that I have. And I would like to see that used both for holding police accountable for getting information when there are complaints or incidents, but also for police to be able to improve their own practice by looking at their interactions after the fact and reflecting on them. There are great protocols for doing that from teachers. If you want help with that, come talk to us. Sorry about my dog barking. And finally, as far as the proposal to form a task force on reimagining police in Brookline, I think that's critical because if we don't know where we want to go, we're not going to get there. So first we have to figure out where we want to go. So I thank you very much. I won't take any more of your time. And thank you for your diligent work on this. Please address the issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. The next person signed up for public comment is Gerald Alston. Gerald, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video.
Hello, guys. Like I said, I'm not going anywhere. Let me start by apologizing to Mr. Fernandez. I did a rant recently, and I prayed before I got on here, and I felt like my mother was talking to me when she said, "Be calm." I am going to humble myself and say, if it is your decision to put up a Black Lives Matter poster or whatever on the town of Brookline's town hall, and you're feeling as though that is a positive step in the right direction, then I think you should do so, but only after resolving my issue. I cannot continue and will not continue to be angry. I am going to stay as positive as I can. Saying that you want to do this is saying that you want to move in the right direction. And that's a positive thing. That makes me think maybe you guys are thinking in the right direction. And I have to respect that. But in order for you to do so, I really think you need to take care of my situation first. It is not hard. And I know we teach our children this, and I'm not calling you guys children, but it's not hard to tell the truth. It's not hard to be honest. I'm going through a lot. My life has changed completely. But if you want me to believe that putting that up is moving in the right direction, and I suggest you start with me. I don't think when they talk about defunding the police, and this is a whole nother subject, means that the police are going to be lost completely. That's not what it's meant to do. I want to look at you guys as human beings. That's what I want. I want to believe in you guys as human beings. That's what I want. This anger and frustration that I have is not going to fix anything. And my mother would not want that.
You have 20 seconds.
Please, do what's right. You're human beings like me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairperson Green, I believe you have a statement to read from a member of the public, Luciana, who asked for that to be read on her behalf.
Okay, yes, we received a statement, and I guess I'm the one to read it. Dear Select Board, Brookline for Racial Justice and Equality and Equity congratulates the newest member of the Select Board, John Van Scoyoc, and Heather Hamilton for her decisive victory. We welcome a chance to work with all Select Board members who support equity and social justice. We are extremely concerned about what we witnessed at the demonstration last week, peacefully organized by high school students and attended by families. We worry that the aggressive and unnecessary use of force we saw represents ongoing behavior that must change. BRJE asks for these things. Hire non-police independent investigators to review complaints and make determinations that your board can rely on. Start a system of interviewing those who have gone through the complaint process. Purchase body cams and dash cams and to use on every officer and in every car. This should be part of the new police contract. Create higher standards for when an officer stops someone or puts his hands on someone. Create higher standards for how officers talk to people of color. Provide racial justice and cultural competency training for the police, all police and new hires. We support Dr. Fernandez's proposal for the creation of a task force to reimagine policing in Brookline. Review our current police policies through an equity and justice lens. Provide public feedback on those policies through community engagement. Explore alternative models to community safety and policing being employed in municipalities around the world. Hold forums to reimagine policing in Brookline. Make recommendations for change locally and gain support for state and local funding. I'm sorry, I assume that's funding, it says finding. We believe this will reduce the number of civil violations which require police enforcement. We need to restore the trust between police and our community. BRJE would like to offer resources and the opportunity to hold public forums between the community, police, and town officials, led by conflict resolution experts. Brookline has an opportunity to be a national leader in our approach to community safety. Let's get this work done together. In terms of the budget, we are appalled to see item 27, affordable housing. This cut is a matter of equity, especially during a pandemic. Low-income families will bear the burden again. A cut of more than 100% that falls on those who may struggle with remote learning and job losses is unacceptable. We ask that you revise and reconsider and find other places in the budget to make cuts. We know now that the times are hard on us all, but they fall hardest on those with fewer resources. Prioritize those who need the most. The heart of a town is revealed by its budget. Brookline, stand for justice and equity. Change your priorities and change your budget. Signed with urgency, Abby Erdman and Luciana Chaknik, co-chairs of Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity. Thank you.
That's the conclusion of the public comment.
Okay, let's move on to our calendar. Anyone have anything else to add before we move on?
Collector, Town Administrator. I support going directly to public comment given the volume, but I had asked the town clerk, the assistant town clerk, and the Jeffrey Nutting, their consultant, to update us on the very quickly on the town election that was held this past week. And I don't know if they're still here, but yes, apparently Jeff is here. And Jeff, if you could just quickly give an update. I did share with the board your very thoughtful comments about a recap, and also looking forward to voting in a different kind of new mail-in era. And so just happy to just get a quick update from you, and also want to recognize the town clerk's office, led by Linda Goldberg and assisted by Jeff Nutting, and many other departments, many other residents of the town who worked, and many who volunteered. It was a difficult election during a very difficult time, but I think you'll hear that we feel it went very successful given all the restrictions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mel. Congratulations to the re-election and the new board member. You got a lot of things to look forward to. So real quickly, on behalf of Linda and myself, we want to give the board and the community update on our election. Again, thanks to the board for your leadership during these tough COVID times, and certainly relating to the town election. The town and school staff did an incredible job on countless details to prepare and successfully run the election. The citizens should be proud of those employees and volunteers that made it a success. We had a really good turnout, given it was a COVID election and only one town-wide contested race. I looked and I provided the board, the last 7 elections, you had an average of 19.4 turnout, and this election was 17.5. So pretty much in the ballpark. Lots of folks, obviously over 5,000 asked for absentee ballots, which was, I think the highest before that for a local election was in the 700s. So a staggering amount that quite frankly overwhelmed us, but we were able to get everyone out the door. I did visit several locations during the day and received a lot of positive feedback. Every voter almost wore gloves and masks. There was no issues whatsoever at the polls. We had 50% of our workers were new because of the concern of the COVID virus of our current volunteer workers, but they did a great job. And then we reached out to all the wardens and clerks and asked for feedback so we can improve the process for the next election for both the voters and the workers. We plan to investigate the complaints and comments and concerns about ballots not being received. There were we received several calls. We did mail out ballots a second time to many people that requested them, but it doesn't explain the long delays of, between us sending out a ballot and folks getting them in a timely fashion. Once we've done our investigation, I'd like to report back to the board and the community so people understand what the issue was and what the fix will be. But we're confident that most people had a chance that did it in a timely fashion, but something's broken in the mix, to be honest with folks. I think we should keep the current polling precincts at least through November to keep folks out of the Brookline Housing Authority facilities as well as the fire station facility. That's a board decision, but they all seem to work well and it was COVID safe. And I think in the long run, we need to review the current locations, whether you should ever return to those housing facilities or the fire station in the future. There's no rush in doing that, but I think it's something to look forward to. As far as a look ahead, I did send Mel a copy. It's time to replace your voting equipment. It's over 20 years old. They stopped making it 13 years ago. And I know you can't do it this year because of the budget crunch, but something you can look forward in 2021. Maybe, if you want to have accurate and fair elections, you have to have good equipment. And we'd like to start to get the word out right now about early voting for the next election and reach out to people so we can get them to apply for a ballot now on an ongoing basis. If possible, we'd like to produce a video. A lot of people didn't understand how to request a ballot, how to return the ballot, and I think we need a lot more public education and outreach to the citizens especially in July and into early August, so people can get the ballot in on time. We ought to think, I have to thank one of the citizens about using the boxes in the front of the town hall to drop off ballots, but I think we need our own ballot location that we're secure, and we didn't have keys. But I think if mail-in ballot is the way of the future, we need a secure box that we have access to, and we hopefully can work on that. The staff is quite frankly is insufficient to handle the September and November elections. I think that if we get temporary help at the very least for 4 months. I mean, we used 3 staff people from other departments that had been furloughed. Without them, there's no way we would have got out, the 5,000 absentee ballots, never mind if we have 10 or 15 or 20,000 when you come to a presidential election. So, I mean, we can work with you folks on that, whether it's temporary people. I mean, I think after November, we don't have an election till the following May and things will, level off a little. We really think the state should change the date when you can request a ballot to suggest. It's unfair to the voters to tell them that they can request an absentee ballot 12 hours before the election starts and expect to get a ballot on a timely fashion. that is just ludicrous. I think maybe reach out to the state rep. That ought to be a 7 to 10 day lead time for people. You know, we want your ballot, we want you to vote, but to say, oh, send me one out, you know, the day before is just old fashioned. I think we have to think too at the state level about changing the time that you can submit your last ballot as a absentee. Right now it's 8 o'clock. I drove down to the post office at 7:15 to pick up the last ballots of the day. Those have to come back to the town hall. They have to be stamped in, and then they have to be driven to the precincts in order to get recorded at the precinct level. That's pretty impossible if you have till 8 o'clock to do that. So another example of trying to be fair to the voters, you know, maybe it should be noon the day of election or 4 o'clock, but giving them to the last moment creates chaos for everybody. And finally, I think that we really need to document the entire process. You know, right now the department, you know, it's been around and the clerk's done a great job, but everything's in people's heads. There's no written documents or procedures that are collated. So if someone's not there, people can at least look and understand the process and procedure and have a plan, a succession plan. So when, you know, when a new clerk comes in, you know, they don't have to pick up the pieces from start. So that's just a brief report. I think, thanks again to the board. I think it was a success and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you and Linda Goldberg and your entire staff for running an excellent election under very, very difficult circumstances. My ballot did not get to me until Thursday, so I was forced to go up to town hall and vote. I must say that the setup you had at town hall was very, in my view, very safe. It really made people comfortable that all the concerns that the concerns that people would have regarding the virus and safety around other people were addressed. And you know, thank you for doing that. It's going to be important to use those what we've learned in the June election as we come into some very, very important elections in September and especially November.
I had a few questions. First of all, thank you. I know that you all were operating under unprecedented circumstances, and there are all kinds of changes that the office wasn't used to that were made because of this pandemic. A few questions for you. One, I know that we always have the sort of the list of frequent voters, of folks that have voted before. When will that list come out? One of the things I'm because of the issue with the ballots that I'm concerned about is that if people's votes actually got counted. So folks maybe sent it in the mail, maybe they sent it in, you know, weeks ahead of time. I know there's a list of every person who voted, not how they voted, but who voted. When will that be available?
Within 2 weeks.
Within 2 weeks.
We're having the staff starting next week look at who requested a ballot and which ones actually got returned. We wouldn't get 100% because some people just don't send in their ballot, but at least give us an idea of what the gap is.
Yeah.
And we can report that back to the board as I suggested, along with the discrepancy in the mail issue.
Okay, that was the other question I had is how many were sent out versus how many were returned, because some people may just decide not to return the ballot. So if that number would be helpful. And then the other one is, I guess if we can just take a look at to see if there was any impact on those poll closures that we voted on. Meaning, did people in that precinct where they would normally vote, their polling place was collapsed with another, did they vote around the same rates on average? I know that it fluctuates, but could we tell if there was any significant, I guess, impact on that? You wouldn't know that at this moment, but if we can look.
Well, actually, if Mel gave you the sheet that I gave you, I put the vote down by precinct.
Right.
So you can look at the last 7 elections and see if there's any impact on this election in precincts, you know, 3, 7, 10, and 15. So I would, you know, off the top of my head, for instance, in 3, we had 416 this year and 366 last year. So there actually was a higher turnout. In 6, it was 567, 514, and 7, 348 to 375. I don't believe just based on statistics that it affected people.
All right, we'll take a look at that.
Look at that spreadsheet and do that work, but
yeah, that'll be
why I
helpful
provide-
as we think about whether or not we want to continue with the closures for September and November. So that's good. That's helpful. And then the last question was just about you're recommending new equipment. Are you recommending that before September/November?
No.
Or do you mean after? Okay.
No.
I was okay.
No.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
2021.
Okay. Good to hear.
We can't change horses now. There's too much at stake.
I agree. And thank you so much for all your work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
But one of the great things about the equipment we use is that there's a paper trail. So if something happens, we have the paper to sort of verify the results. I assume that those types of machines are still available. I know a lot of states use other bizarre type systems.
Well, I would suggest that if it gets to be a serious discussion, that a demonstration be brought forth before the board and the advisory board to review the difference between the old and new, and whether that's after the first of the year, so people understand if you're going to move ahead what you're actually looking at.
Right. Very good idea. Okay. Any other comments, questions? So we have we missed one person seeking to make a comment. Arthur Conquest. So I'm going to give him an opportunity to make his comment.
Bernard,
Yes.
I wanted to just compliment Mr. Nutting and Linda Goldberg on the report. I thought that it was very thorough. It really laid out the issues that we need to think about and we need to take action on. And I thought it was really comprehensive, and I'm appreciative of that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Williams.
I have promoted Arthur Conquest to a panelist. Arthur, when you're ready, you can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable.
Okay, so am I unmuted now?
You are. You might want to just tilt your camera down a little bit. There you go.
How's that? Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Not sure how I got missed. I think my presentation is under 3 minutes, so I don't think you have to stop me, but I know it's not going to be long, but please, okay, because I get all jittery. This is not my forte. I should have read this in March, but I have been sidelined or frightened just by the coronavirus and haven't been able to come to town hall. But I'm going to read. On Tuesday, the 3rd of March, 2020, I spoke to members of the Select Board during their public comment period, 6:00 p.m. I brought 4 items to your attention. 1, an issue of my being stopped and questioned by private security personnel while walking near a local synagogue, and that I had met with the leadership of that institution and established that it was my constitutional right to be able to pass on public sidewalks without being stopped and interrogated by their congregants. 2, town meeting member Precinct 4 Donnell O'Neill's warrant article 29, which had passed favorably at fall town meeting just passed, though it had encountered a few unusual stumbling blocks in the process when it landed at the State House. 3, a request to obtain information about Natasha Tidwell, an attorney with the law firm Hogan Lovells, and the investigation she was hired to conduct about firefighter Gerald Alston and the lawsuit that had been in the forefront of issues in Brookline for maybe a decade now. 4, a 29th January 2020 email I'd sent to Select Board Bernard Green concerning statements made by members of the Brookline Police Union in a Facebook post about me. Verbatim, I'm reporting what was written and officially published as minutes of my 3rd of March 2020 public comment presentation. Quote, in Select Board 303/2020, page 2 of 18, announced updates. Arthur Conquest Town Meeting Member 6 spoke on meeting with a local religious entity on how he was treated passing by their property. He had a dialogue with them. He asked about the process related to warrant Article 29 from last town meeting and why it landed at the State House. He would like to get an update on Special Counsel Natasha Tidwell's progress, unquote. What happened to item number 4, my 29th of January 2020 email I sent to Chair Bernard Green in these minutes? What is more, I would like a written reply from Chair Green regarding the issue I raised in my 29th of January letter to him. Mr. Green, at the Select Board meeting, also the email in question did not get sent to the wrong address as referenced during my brief exchange with Mr. Green at the Select Board meeting. I have a number of email exchanges about the proper address I should and shouldn't use when communicating with him. Finally, I'd like the 24th of January email and the written copy of this presentation included as being officially submitted at that Select Board meeting. Thank you. Again, I would like Select Person Green, Chairman Green, to respond to my 29th email that I had sent to him. Thank you.
Thank you. So I assume there are no other comments. Go to the calendar. Question of adopting the proclamation for Pride Month and endorse Pride crosswalk near Town Hall. Selectman, would you like to, or Mr. Crane, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So you have a memo in your board packet from myself and Caitlin Starr, who is the Assistant Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. This is the second year that we are coming before you and asking the Select Board to join other municipal neighbors, locally, regionally, and nationally, in declaring June to be Pride Month in honor of the LGBTQ community. And to also, I believe Caitlin is coming online right now, and to also, as a symbol and to demonstrate the commitment publicly, to paint, once again, paint the crosswalk on Washington Street at Thayer Street near Town Hall in the inclusive Pride crosswalk colors. Last year, the board voted unanimously for the proclamation, and we had a great community event with approximately 100 residents of all different ages coming out and working with staff from DPW and Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, as well as the police department, in painting the crosswalk. And we had hoped to do something similar this year and actually to expand it into multiple crosswalk locations as asked for by the community at that meeting, at that event. Unfortunately, due to COVID and the limitations on social distancing, as well as limiting the amount of people we can have at any one event, this year we are requesting that you once again vote for the proclamation, and DPW staff will actually paint the crosswalk this year. We are hoping next year to come back before you again for a third time, and hopefully under better circumstances be able to have our community event once again, to have not one but several crosswalks painted at various community events throughout the month of June by the community.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah. So I'm glad we get to do this again. I'll also note that in painting this crosswalk, we include the black and brown colors as part of the rainbow there, to indicate support and solidarity with black and brown folks who identify as LGBTQ in our community and everywhere. The other, I will say also, I'm sad that, having been there, and I know others were there too, to paint last year, that we can't do this as a community event. DPW will undoubtedly do a better job painting that crosswalk than we did. But I hope we can return to making it a community event in the future. And I understand why we're not right now. I know that we have these proposals to paint other crosswalks, and I like the first proposal, the one that had multiple crosswalks in town. What's preventing us from doing that? Is it a funding issue or some other issue?
So my understanding is there are concerns funding, but also in terms of we just so the rest of the board knows, we had targeted 2 crosswalks on Harvard Street, sort of bookending Coolidge Corner. Unfortunately, that would require us rerouting the Route 66 bus, trying to work with the MBTA to figure out a rerouting of that bus around those crosswalks. Either that or doing it during an overnight using DPW overtime staff when the 66 bus isn't working. So that was the concern there in terms of the extra manpower this year that in costs that would go into DPW either working overnight or trying to work with the T and rerouting the Route 66 bus. We also had chosen 2 crosswalks in Washington Square along Washington Street as well. And there were similar concerns there with one DPW staff, as well as the necessary police that we would need to stop the traffic, et cetera. And then also there was some concern with the fire department trying to exit. There's a fire station right on Washington Street, and if they have to come out and exit towards Washington Square and try how to manage that. And essentially we needed more time to figure out those plans. The paint that used, just so everyone knows, is not a regular pavement marking paint that drives in 30 minutes. That paint's not available in the colors that are in the flag. So what we actually use is we go to Home Depot and we buy what some people will buy, the bare concrete for driveways and garage floors. And that takes 3 to 4 hours minimum to dry when you put a thick enough coat on it to try to last when traffic drives over it. So it's not a matter of just the 30 minutes that it's painting. It also has to sit not driven over for another 4 hours. So it was going to require a lot more planning, a lot more overtime, and logistics than we really have time to do. So this year, again, we're hoping to paint this one crosswalk and then come back next year with detailed plans and hit the ground running in the beginning of June and have a series of community events.
Okay. I would like to encourage us. I know Chair Green shared a photo earlier today of some streets in Waltham, or one street at least in Waltham, that was closed off. It was a beautiful site. I mean, a lot of space for people to sort of walk around and everything. If we end up, I know we're looking at also outdoor dining and things like that. If there's an area where we're going to close off a street anyway, I'd encourage us to think about whether or not we can, like for instance, in Coolidge Corner, whether or not we could get that crosswalk painted as part of that closure that we'll be doing anyway, perhaps.
Yep, we can definitely look at it if the opportunity comes.
Yeah, thanks to you and Caitlin for continuing to work on this. Appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Okay, any other questions, comments regarding this? So I move approval of adopting the proclamation for Pride Month and endorsing the Pride crosswalk near Town Hall. All in favor, Ms. Heller,
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez,
Aye.
Mrs. Vanskoya. I think that's aye. You're muted, and chair votes aye.
Aye. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crane. And thank you, Caitlin.
Mr. Chair, I did want to let you know that unfortunately I missed someone who requested to speak in public comment in the chat, Josh Anya Osa. It doesn't appear that he is still here, but I did just want to say thank you to everyone for your patience as we navigate, our first meeting in Zoom. You can always sign up in advance for public comment, use the hand raise feature and the chat to request to speak in public comment or in a public hearing. And I am sorry for that oversight.
Thank you, Devin. Okay, next. Question of approving 2020 annual town meeting to be held through remote participation pursuant to and as described in Section 8A of Chapter 92 of the Acts of 2020 of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Mr. Kleckner, you'd like to fill us in on this?
Sure. Just very briefly, it's very simple. The state legislature finally did pass a special act that allows for remote annual meetings for towns, and just in time for us. Lexington is in the middle of their remote town meeting, and this legislation will retroactively help them as well to make sure that this town meeting is legal. You may be aware that bond counsel had raised some concerns, and those are obviated by the new legislation. But the new legislation does require the board to take some sort of a mechanical or technical vote, and town moderator has worked with the town council to propose that, and I believe that's in your packet today.
Yep. Okay, any questions from the select board?
This isn't so much a question. I just want to acknowledge the hard work of our state rep, Tommy Vitola, one of our state reps, who worked on this legislation specifically, so that we can enjoy, social distancing and still continue our democratic traditions.
Yeah. Yes, thank you to Representative Vitola. He's so helpful in so many ways, and this is one of the more recent, very important things that he got through the legislature. Any other questions? Okay, I move approval of the 2020 annual town meeting to be held through remote participation pursuant to and as described in Section 8A of Chapter 92, Acts of 2020 of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. All in favor, Mrs. Heller.
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton.
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez.
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair, there was a very detailed motion in your packet. I'm just going to assume that you meant to incorporate that in your vote.
Yes,
We'll
yes, I'm
reference
sorry.
that.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to say about town meeting is in March, when you initially supported the proposal to reduce the scale of the warrant articles to be considered, you did take a vote. And part of that vote, your vote actually just referred to a memo I wrote. But specifically, I want to call out something in the memo that I'm sure you continue to support, but the town moderator asked me to clarify this with you. And that is, when you took the position of reducing the scope of reducing the scope of the warrant, you did so by committing that you, the select board, will place on the warrant for the next scheduled town meeting those articles that were deferred, with the understanding that petitioned articles will be included by the board without the need to resubmit petitions. So just wanted to clarify that. And, actually, we're going to have a vote next week because the actual articles that you previously voted to defer or take up have changed a little bit, and we're going to try to get into sync next week with the advisory committee. But even before then, I did want you to confirm that it is your intent that you would include at the next town meeting any of these articles that ended up being deferred without the need to resubmit petitions.
Okay, so you're saying that we're going to vote on that next week?
Yes, but I feel you've already taken that position. We will present a vote for you next week. I just, if there's any concerns or feelings that would not be a commitment of the board, we should say that. I think the idea is to assure people that you will do that so that there is not efforts to try to add on articles to this town meeting in a remote way, which, right, we're very worried about completing by June 30th.
Good. Okay. Any questions about that?
No, I believe it was our intent to move them over. I mean, some petitioners may want to do a new warrant article on the same subject or withdraw the old one or whatever, but it was our commitment, I believe, to have those warrant articles. I'm assuming that they don't have to go and get more signatures, but
so that's up to you.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, no, but I don't know whether that's, that would be
Oh, yes,
permissible
you
under
control the
state law.
warrant.
So
You
I
can
just don't
decide
know.
which articles to put in.
That's fine.
Yeah, and
Okay,
the only
that's
difference
fine then.
between what we're going to vote next week and what we voted in the past is that I think warrant Article 16, the advisory committee has included in the so-called essential articles that must be voted. That's Oak Street, as well as there's I think warrant Article 4, which is a sort of housekeeping matter related to bank fees. Will also be included as one of the essential articles that we vote on at the June town meeting.
Just to be clear, Bernard, Article 4 is special appropriation closeouts, and there is no motion under that article. I believe the advisory committee original motion included Article 4, and so this is just to match our motion with the advisory committee, but there will be no motion offered under this article.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I'll just say that yes, I agree. And then also, I'm sure the moderators already thought about this, but what Nancy said about just making sure that the petitioners actually want their warrant article brought back would be important. And then maybe because when we gave this sense of the board, it was before John joined the board, maybe we give an opportunity for him to join us in this commitment if he'd like to.
All right. Good. Yeah, petitioners always have an opportunity or the right to withdraw their warrant articles. I think it's important, though, to just to complete the circle to make sure that every warrant article is eligible to or will be what's the word, eligible to be taken up in November, and people can withdraw them if they want. Okay, next. Budget.
John, you with us on this or what?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay.
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, John. Now the fun begins.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me find something on my computer.
I'm going to turn my camera off because of bandwidth issues.
Okay.
So, but I'll be here.
Okay. So this discussion is on the agenda so that among other reasons, we can give our new board member an opportunity to express his views with respect to the budget and give the rest of the select board member an opportunity to digest those views and the views of the public at last week's public hearing during the comments we heard tonight. And of course, the many, many, many emails that we've been receiving over the last few days and be able to digest all that before we vote for favorable action or not on the budget, which will be next week, 1 week before town meeting. So to start off, do we have a representative from the school committee here? I was told that we would get someone. Mr. Kleckner, do you know anything about?
I'm promoting Mary Ellen Norman.
Oh, great. So, Mary Ellen, I would like to start with an update on the school budget, explanation of the statutory and contract requirements that made it necessary for you to give the termination notices to school employees, so that the public has a better understanding of the processes you have to go through in this budget process, and then an update on the employees who will be called back and discussion of the general budget issues that you're facing.
Sure. I can share some slides from Ben's most recent update, and I believe I will cover all of those. If I don't, I know that you will ask me at the end. And I will try to keep this to less than a minute a slide. There are about 15 of them. You should have them in hopefully you have them, but kind of give you a brief overview, but to kind of make sure, let's see, I'm going to share my screen. So you should see slides here. Oops, what I got here. We are in, let's see, I'm not getting in advance. All right. We're planning a budget in very unprecedented times at this point. And so one of the drivers for us in terms of, to sort of start off with kind of the issue around us giving notice to our BEU staff is we had a contractual agreement or have a contractual agreement for non-renewal notices and sort of reductions in force notices to be issued on May 15th of every year. We received an extension to May 30th. The state statute is June 15th, and many of you may have already started hearing about other districts issuing reduction in force memos, or memorandums or letters to employees. Because we're planning a budget where we're just getting guidance right now from DESE with how we're going to deliver education in the fall. Tonight, the school committee received a presentation around how we were offering BEEP in our early childhood education program. So that was a critical piece, because if we were not able to offer BEEP in in person, we have in having to close or shutter or reduce BEEP, then those teachers, only of which 2 or 3 did not have professional status, would be bumping into our K through 2 grades.
Ms. Norman, can I add? Professional status, what you're really talking about is tenure.
Tenure.
The so-called non-professional status employees are professionals. I mean, they're teachers. And,
they're within 3 years, the first 3 years of their teaching. So to obtain professional status, it takes 3 years to obtain that status. And then
I say that because when I was on a school board in Ohio, we called what you're calling non-professional teachers, non-tenured teachers. These are still professional people.
Yes.
And we should treat them that way.
Yes. So we are, so part of our planning was around maximum flexibility, because we have a number of professional status teachers who, meaning they have their tenure, who would potentially be bumping and we also had reductions and the like. So we were looking for maximum flexibility, and we're in the process of calling teachers back. We're starting with the professional status teachers whose positions were reduced as part of the process. I'll go through those because we had reductions in April to balance to the April revenue amount before we had COVID hit and reduced the revenue projections. We are also looking at how to provide a remote learning environment, and so what are the positions and the functions that we are going to need going forward. And to really looking at what our staff is and what our positions are that we need going forward. So part of what we've been doing in terms of our budget planning is, priority is preserving and maintaining special education staff, social and emotional health and guidance counselors, social workers, and making sure we have those supports in place, preserving core academics, focusing and preserving English language education, METCO, Steps to Success, and making sure we had the funds and resources to support those. And as I mentioned before, also making sure we prioritize and how do we preserve and maintain BEEP. So slide 6 shows you sort of what we've been kind of attending to. So the orange column is April and where we were. We had a balanced budget in April ready to present to the select board and town meeting. And then we received a reduction on May 15th and then an adjustment on May 29th. And so we're currently working with the green column May 29th, and we currently have Ben is presenting a closing of that gap tonight. We were down, as of the June 1st meeting, we were down to a $500,000 gap. The superintendent will have a recommendation to the school committee tonight on closing that. That has the specifics of that will be done in executive session because we're still dealing with potentially positions that we are going to have to reduce. So the next few slides I won't go through other than to sort of point out that there are slides here of what happened in January, what we were doing in terms of our reductions to get to the April budget. what reductions we did in April to balance the budget, and how we were doing that. Because as you recall, we were focusing and really working on trying to get rid of our $2 million structural gap that we have been experiencing for at least the 5 years I've been here, and prior to that, and then kind of where we landed in May, and sort of some of the adjustment of the 6.3 down to the 4.4, and sort of documenting that. So I don't want to spend too much time. You folks are aware of those, and that just kind of get where we are. So this is where the superintendent and the school committee landed landed in April, where we actually, he had proposed reductions that actually left a contingency of about $500,000 for sort of other unknowns. The school committee on June 4th modified that recommendation, leaving our $500,000 gap. And so what the school committee did is they continued the $1.7 million reductions in district-wide leadership and central office and some district-wide and expenditures. It eliminated planned annual increases for all staff with the exception of AFSCME, because AFSCME has an agreement, their agreement goes through June 30th of 21, and maintained funding for BEU steps and lanes. But that still left a budget gap of $500,000. So right now we're in the process of rescinding layoff notices for the professional status teachers first. Those are happening this week. We're identifying the paths whereby there are bumping paths, and also where we are rescinding layoff notice for where pre-professional status positions are guaranteed. So based on some decisions of the school committee, there are programs whereby we're not going to be having reductions. World language is one of them, where we will be bringing world language teachers back, but we're in the process of, and most of those will be solved and resolved by attrition and those that have chosen to retire, or who had already given us notice they were moving or leaving the district prior to any RIF notice being provided to them. And we're continuing our planning and identifying cost savings and potential sources of revenue. So, preparing for town meeting, advisory yourselves in terms of kind of explaining a budget that is still in a state of being pretty dynamic and shifting as we get guidance from DESE. So one of the things you may have heard about in terms of our classroom space is the recent guidance for our early childhood program is that there are no more than 12 adults in a classroom, 12 people in a classroom, which means that our BEEP program would be 10 students, one teacher and one para. We typically would have 15 students in a BEEP classroom, one teacher and two paras. So we have a reduction in seats for BEEP. And we are waiting for guidance whether that same ratio is going to be true K through 12, because that would significantly reduce the number of students we can have back in a classroom. So while Brookline enjoys 16 to 21 students, 23 students in a classroom, we don't have enough classrooms to bring everybody back if the ratio is 12 human beings in a classroom. Given that we have special ed one-on-one, we have pull out, we have push in, we have lots of teachers coming and going into in and out of our classrooms. So the dynamics of that. And one thing to report is the DESE is actually doing a significant amount of support and planning so that all districts are following the same guidance, which is so that you don't have Newton doing one thing and us doing another and Cambridge doing a third method, and to try to streamline as much as possible what districts are able to do. And so with that, I guess I'm going to open it to questions that you may have, or clarifications to anything you may have heard. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen until you need a slide.
So what will we be receiving from the school committee before town meeting in terms of updates of this budget?
You should receive, hopefully we will have our typical, our town meeting document we've had before. We're trying to keep, OpenGov has been stagnant since April. I'm trying to get that updated so that that's reflective of the reductions in the departments, staffing information, and trying to get that built out. And so that some of the deep sort of details can be obtained from there. But we would have our executive summary that we've provided to town meeting members, hopefully available as part of the supplement that goes out.
What are we hearing about state aid?
I would ask Melissa that question. Only because I've been deep in trying to balance FY20 and 21, so my nose has been onto that grindstone. So I would ask Melissa what she's hearing.
So not much. Most of the MMA calls that we've been on have been focused on the reopening. And so I have not heard any updates out of the legislature on a revised budget number. Other than the earlier revenue consensus hearing that happened at the beginning of the crisis.
Do I remember correctly that state aid does account for a lot of the money that goes towards the schools?
So in Brookline, we divide state aid 50-50. So that is a piece of what supports the school department budget, yes.
I have heard concerns raised very recently that a significant number of the 300 that were to have received notices haven't yet received their notices, and a deadline is approaching for them to receive their notices. Is that the case?
A number of letters have been issued. You know, we want to make sure we get it right, because once you pull a teacher back, we have to fund them. So I know that the letters, there were letters issued today. There are a lot of letters going back out, particularly where we know we can guarantee that there's a position available. So that, and we'll be continuing to issue notification and letters just like, so even though we can always call a person back, that's part of the contract as I understand it. So we do have notification requirements for our paraprofessionals that we need to get out tomorrow as well. And so we don't necessarily, so there'll be some non-renewal notices going out to our paraprofessionals tomorrow. So quite a lot of communication needs to go out. And so we're working as hard as we can to get that done.
If I may, another question. As planned within this budget, will there be any space within the system that is currently rented that is unused, although rent is continuing to be paid on it?
So that space is all BEEP space. So hopefully after tonight's presentation that we had, we will be reopening BEEP and reopening those classrooms and those spaces. There's some conversation around, that's right now, that's that plan, is we would be reopening BEEP and reopening, those spaces would reopen and be in use.
And full utilization of the Clark Road space?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions?
Sure. First of all, I'll just say I appreciate some of the changes that have been made in terms of where the savings are going to come from. I appreciate that slide number 13 that shows a change in sort of the cuts coming from the central office side rather than those closest to our kids. my opening remarks, I talked about wanting to direct more funding to help close this, what still remains $500,000 gap. I guess my question for you is, if this board decided to direct more funding toward the schools to help close that gap, what would that money do?
So I am not sure what Ben is actually presenting because he hasn't presented it publicly yet. So I can't really answer that. I think the school committee shares the same, philosophy that you do in terms of making sure that student-facing positions and supports remain and are prioritized. And that, I think I do have to raise a little bit just to tie the conversation about the length of time it takes to get letters back out to call people back, is that when you cut central office or central administration, we do some of the back office work to be able to get supplies to classrooms, to get people in the classrooms and the like. So I personally have some concern as to what the back and the behind the scenes work, you need to make sure that that work gets done so teachers have and students have what they need when they need it. It's a balancing act, clearly. It totally is, and certainly appreciate the community sentiment around making sure our priorities are student facing.
Well, I'll certainly continue to push for that money to get directed in that way. It'll be important for me though to understand, and you're right, we have to hear from the superintendent on this, to know that money is going to go where the community has spoken so loudly and so clearly, where they want to see it go. And so time's ticking. I guess maybe we'll know by the next time we meet on Tuesday, right?
You might know tomorrow morning.
Okay. All right, bye.
We have an executive session this evening, so that's part of it. School committee will be receiving that information tonight.
Okay.
Hey, let me ask a question about the central office cuts. I mean, the central office is always the boogeyman. Cut here, cut there, or cut there before you cut anywhere else. But central office staff, in addition to doing the back office work you mentioned to get these notices out, also includes administrators who do fairly important work in terms of ensuring that, for example, special ed kids' experiences are equitable across the district. And that whether your child receives the services he needs is not dependent on the luck of the draw of the school that he's located in. So I guess I would like to get a better understanding of what types of cuts are in this $1.6 million taken out of central administration.
Yeah. So two of the items one of them is a senior director out of the Office of Teaching and Learning that was added as part of the 2015 override to support the curriculum development and grants administration and teaching and learning. One of them is a special education director. We have a position that person that's retiring, so we're not cutting the position, but we're actually not funding it for 21. We've done some consolidation of some positions because we have a person that's going to be on a sabbatical, so we're consolidating a position, or we have a position that may be leaving, and so we're consolidating and not filling positions. And so those are just off the top. Our June 4th presentation has a list of those positions in it. I can get that to the board after I get off. I'll make sure I get Devin a copy so you have the details of those, that slide or those slides for that question.
Yes, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
I lost my screen. Can everyone see me?
Yes.
I'm clear.
Something's going on with my computer.
Would it be all right if I ask another question?
Of course.
There are numerous task forces that include many community representatives on them that are doing the work of helping to plan for school reopening, both in terms of the educational plan, but also the operational plan. And we did hear within the past week
through the head of the Brookline Educators Association that teachers are not participating in those task forces. Can those task forces plan effectively without teachers taking part in them? Mary Ellen? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm worried.
Maybe she's frozen.
I think her screen is frozen.
Good question, John. It was a good question.
It must have been my question. Sorry.
Why are teachers not participating? Is it
as explained in an interview that was done, by Jessica Shubo on instructions of the leadership of their union.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Gee, I got another question for Mary Ellen, but I'll have to let it slide, I guess.
She did mention that there are some Wi-Fi issues at Town Hall where she is right now. So I think I'll keep an eye out for her.
Let's see if we can get, is there any way we can know whether we can get her back?
She'll just need to rejoin the meeting. She's been bumped out 3 times already since she's been in the attendee list. I watch her leave and come back. Yeah.
There you are, Mary Ellen. We have a question for you, or John has a question for you. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. She's talking. Mary Ellen, did you hear my question by any chance?
No, I got halfway through. So what I'm experiencing, I'm in town hall and switching to Zoom, I've been bumped off 2 or 3 times, both at advisory last night and now you're 2 or 3 times tonight for your meeting. Fung's notified, they're looking at it, but
we're glad you're back.
I'm not sure any platform's reliable.
I don't know. I had a question about the task forces.
Okay.
Are at work and with the participation of a number of people from the community that volunteered to join. It came out this past week that teachers have not participated in the task forces. And the question is, can the task forces be effective planning for the reopening of school without the participation of teachers?
I'm not quite sure. It's an interesting, I guess I'm not I haven't been a part of those task forces and the conversations. I believe there are teachers that are participating. So I don't know specifically, myself personally, I can't answer specifically that I don't know that teachers are or are not participating. So I'm not sure I can answer that. I will, Ben has the answer for that. I can relay that question and have him answer that back to you. I would expect that teachers have a vested interest in participating.
A different suggestion that has been offered is that millionaires and billionaires could be solicited to write checks to help fund Bernard's giving away the punchline here, to fund operations. Any comment on that? I mean, is that a plausible approach to attempting to get more money into the school department budget?
Well, so I guess what I will address is that the school committee actually has a policy to not accept donations that actually funds recurring expenses in terms of personnel, because what happens next year. And so there are a number, they will redirect donations to the Brookline Community Foundation. There are, yes, we would accept, school committee will accept donations, but it's not that we have to be careful about what the restrictions are of that donation. So small dollar, like PTOs, for example, will pay for a variety of different things within a school, and we'll accept that and pay those bills. But large donors like that, we don't typically, unless the funds are going to be expended for a very specific purpose within that year and have a plan related to it and multi-year funding, school committee would potentially shy away from that and encourage the donor to make a donation to the Brookline Community Foundation. to meet their fund restrictions that they want to put on it. But if it's not multi-year, then it becomes problematic for staffing anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. Any other questions?
I've got one more. I'm sorry. I'm the new guy.
Please. No, it's very important that you get these questions out because it helps all of us understand something about this abstruse school committee budget.
This has to do with a sort of a back of the envelope calculation that one of the school committee members made, which arrived at just a very rough ballpark estimate that there could be as much as $5 million or more in COVID-related expenses that are not actually sort of line itemed in the budget. Is that something that should be of concern, or is there a plan for dealing with that?
So I believe that relates to sort of the PPE and some of the maybe furniture or other modifications we would have to do if we're reopening.
Well, so added personnel as well, yeah.
Yeah, potentially. So until we actually know what we're delivering, it's very hard to know what that cost would be. We got sort of a first glimpse of that with BEEP this evening. I didn't catch all of the presentation because I was here. I was here in your meeting, monitoring your meeting. And so we've gotten a little bit of a preview of some of that cost with BEEP, and we're still waiting for a little bit more detailed guidance from DESE, but that's part of those working groups to help kind of problem solve and plan that out. Yeah, there is a potential for expense. And then when we know that, then that's a community-wide discussion around how do we address that and what are our options.
I believe if I could add, we've been advised that we should not budget for COVID expenses, or else we're not going to get them reimbursed by the federal government. So that's a proactive and conscious strategy, John.
Understood. It still leaves us a little bit in the dark though, right? Because we don't know whether the reimbursements will come through.
Well, we have $5.2 million allocated to the town for fiscal 20 and 21. So we know that at least.
Yeah.
Mary Ellen, can I ask, how far away are we from, let's say last year, let's take it pre-COVID, how far away are we from what we spend right now on BEEP? And I know it's very tuition dependent, from where we are right now and from universal BEEP financially.
Oh. If you limit your enrollment to 280 students.
Well, that's not universal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So millions. That's not calculatable because we would need to know how many 3-year-olds we have, 2.9 to 3 to 5-year-olds we have in town. We don't have a complete and accurate number of that. We need to promote our census so that we have parents fill that information in. It will take statewide legislation, and it will take Chapter 70 money being adjusted. Deval Patrick made an adjustment when he was governor for Chapter 70 for early childhood. That's been very helpful. But since then, we need to have funding come through the state, and we need buildings. You're going to need buildings to add your universal pre-K or preschool.
Right. All right. Well, I'll encourage my school committee friends who may be watching this later. I know that they're meeting as well. If we don't start planning for that now, we're never going to have it. So hopefully.
Helen Charlevsky has been planning universal pre-K since she came on the school committee. So
and that was in 1992.
Yes.
Maybe we can move from planning to some other phase that's beyond that.
She hasn't found the money yet.
She's pretty crafty with that too. She'll find it. It's out there.
Okay. Anything else? Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. That was I thought very helpful discussion. We don't control what you use your money for, but it's important that we have some sense of how your budget is built so that we can generate support or criticism for the schools in the community. I'm sorry.
Appreciate your support and assistance very much.
I know I'm having trouble with my microphone apparently, but so I'll try to remember to hold it close to my mouth. Okay, any other, we still have some other budget discussions that we can have. People want to raise other issues? No? Okay, let's move on.
Hold up. I think Heather was going to go.
Okay, Heather, go ahead.
I know that we were kind of waiting for state guidance on outdoor seating for our restaurants, and so I do hope that we schedule a conversation on the select board to talk about options 2 and 3 with regards to closing local streets. Because I think as the nice weather starts to gain momentum, we're seeing a lot of people, out and about. I was pleased to see that the transportation budget was not really reduced all that much. But what are we doing to accommodate, people that are too scared to take public transit? They find themselves, walking a lot more. I do believe that these are vulnerable populations. So I just want to make sure that we've made sure that the budget reflects that.
Okay, we can talk about that. I mean, those are separate issues to some degree. Whether we adopt options 2 and 3 of the transportation department and funding for transportation needs in the budget. I mean, those are separate issues, aren't they, Mr. Collector? I mean, there's an overlap, of course, but
I'm not exactly sure I follow the question. I will say a couple things. So number one, we have, even before we expand our sidewalks and so on, we have about 50 restaurants that currently have outdoor seating licenses. And so we're hoping that they'll all come back and start to do that. I know some have already begun to open outside. And then we have this new legislation that expedites it for restaurants who don't have a current license to eat outdoors. And but that's going to require us to expand public spaces for these restaurants that are adjacent to these restaurants. And perhaps that's what you were referring to, Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, anything that we can do to accommodate,
Yes.
local business owners that are really struggling, which
Yes.
tend to be people of color, and also people who are finding themselves walking more.
Well, I'm not sure about the walking. I'm not really sure what that, how
To
that relates to
Chairman
this.
Green's point, this is more of a policy, but I assume that anything we do impacts the budget. So I just want to make sure that we've accounted for that.
Okay, I mean, we are going to have discussions beginning tonight, actually, after this item, but more specifically, talking through how we can expand our public areas for restaurant use even further.
Great.
any other budget?
Yes,
related
I would like to
questions? Yeah.
ask, I would like to raise an issue. I noticed that the sanitation budget, which is under Public Works, which is number 13, D, is increasing by 12.4%. And I assume that that increase has something to do with the recycle problem. Is that correct?
So that is correct. The DPW commissioner, I believe, is scheduled to go in front of the board for a contract extension with our current solid waste provider. And I think that's part of the increase as well as the contract extension, which was actually a lot higher, and he was able to negotiate it down to a more reasonable amount. Still definitely a substantial issue, and part of the reason why we are recommending fee increase for the trash fee. And then also, last night I was at the advisory committee meeting, and I know that they're meeting tonight on the budget. And I got a couple of inquiries today, and I think that you'll be getting a resolution from the advisory committee encouraging the board to implement the trash fee sooner than what we were anticipating in the proposed budget. So after we had our series of meetings with the board, we changed our revenue assumption to assume that the trash fee would be implemented mid-year, so in January. And the advisory committee, at least a couple of members have indicated that they're interested in encouraging the board to make that increase in August.
Well, I also wonder about that actually, and that was what my remarks were headed toward. Is it, why are we waiting until mid-year to implement this? I know it is a tough time for people. On the other hand, it's a tough time for us all in municipality, and the cost of this stuff is going up. So what do we do? It seems to me that, we pass some of this, we take care of some of this in our tax bills. And maybe we should look at a system where trash is 100% paid for by the users. I don't know what that would do to the fee. I'm just asking for information, really, because it would free up some money in the general revenues to help us over this hump as well.
As Melissa said, we're going to have some discussions about the recycling contract and its impact on the budget. We will provide some sensitivity analysis on some of these potential costs to and what they would be on the rate, on the trash fee rate. We're very reluctant once COVID, the impacts of the COVID-19 on the economy came down and so many people were out of jobs. As you know, we initially were assuming that we're going to defer both the parking meter rate increase as well as the trash fee, although I think always the trash fee, we realized we really didn't have much of a choice to do something, but we were always going to do that half of the year. And then the board met a few weeks ago, and I think I got the sense they encouraged us to advance at least the parking meter fee. So we can talk about it next week, but I think you'd find that the impacts on the fee are going to be substantial. There's two issues going on. One is, and maybe they're related, but one is the recycling costs, and the other is that our subsidy, our town general tax subsidy of this rate is increasing. That's not the right direction to go on. But
right, and I'm wondering
whatever we do
why,
on both of those is going to increase the rate and to the homeowners or to the residents.
Okay, I'd like just to get some more information about why.
Sure, we'll provide that next week.
Wanted at the top of the meeting, I'd mentioned a couple of very specifics that I want to reiterate now. One is, honestly, I'd like to see no cuts in human services, which is Council on Aging, Health and Human Services, Office of Diversity, Inclusion and Community Relations, and Veteran Services. I know that Health and Human Services is actually scheduled for an increase, which I was glad to see. But there are decreases in the others. I'd like to see no cuts there and a specific increase in the Office of Diversity, Inclusion and Community Relations. I know for some time now, they've been asking for an additional staff member. And town meeting, in its wisdom, with initiatives that I've supported, has continued to put more and more on their plate. And I think it's time to get them the support that they need there, including programming funding to match. The other big piece was the contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which I know we had talked previously about possibly deferring, and I'd like to maintain that commitment this year. I think it's really important, particularly with so many people in the Commonwealth and right here in Brookline struggling with rent and paying rent to be able to actually free up some funds to do that. So I'd like to see all, if not most of that funding show up in the final budget. And then I just had one question about Sometimes it's hard to tell when you look at the line items. I know that there is a scheduled decrease for the library as well. And if maybe somebody can talk a little bit more about what that looks like, what the actual impact of that decrease would be.
Sure. So in a lot of these situations with the departmental cuts, what we did was look at kind of the way that the town will be operating for the first part of the year, knowing that the reopening plan wouldn't allow us to open all the facilities up just like it was pre-COVID. So that's the thought process behind the Council on Aging reductions, the thought process behind the library reductions. With the library specifically, Sarah had a couple of choices where she said, we've got some employees that are furloughed because we're not offering services. I can either bring some of them back and have limited services for the entire year, or I can wait and bring all of them back and offer full services for the second half of the year. And so she thought it was better to try and restore everyone than have limited services throughout the year. So that was the thought process behind the library. With diversity, inclusion, and community relations, knowing that in a COVID environment, there likely would be less programming. So that was kind of the rationale behind that cut as well. And then with veterans, we actually looked at the actuals for the veteran services line and felt there might be some room there to make some reductions. And in talking with Bill, he felt that the intern program that they have, in light of the fact that we have, a couple of layoffs on this list, he felt that would be something that he would rather reduce instead of, the full cut that would need to happen in order to meet the target for his budget.
Can I just respond to a couple of those things? So in terms of the public social service agencies, clearly they have lower funding than most, and most departments, and the cuts that you're seeing, I don't think are all that significant, but we will certainly relook at them again. I did want to address the affordable housing contribution, and I just want to be clear about the affordable housing contribution. So when we talk about putting money in the budget, we're talking about putting money in the budget where an entity will spend for the next 12 months, fiscal 21. In the case of the Housing Trust Fund, we're putting money into a fund. And, it's really arbitrary. And, I don't think that we're going to be spending that kind of money next year. If we are, if the Affordable Housing or Housing Advisory Committee is telling us that they have a project that would need those kind of funds, I would do it in a heartbeat. Really what we're trying to do is just retain some flexibility with our reserves. This is free cash money. It's not general tax money. It's going into the Housing Trust Fund. They probably have about $3 or $4 million already in there. And we just want to create some flexibility. It was not intended to reduce housing programs or affordable housing opportunities.
Right. No, I think that's totally fair. And what I'll ask to do, I'll see if I don't even know if he's on right now, but it'd be helpful to hear from Roger over at the HAB. If they were to get these funds, what would they plan to do? Would it get a project over the hump or something like that? So maybe we can get that information from him between now and the next time we meet. Okay.
And Raul, I just want to clarify also that the recommendation, essentially, we are recommending that we not appropriate the free cash that we were previously planning towards this fund. So if we don't appropriate it, it should fall to free cash and get cycled in for next year. So that's one note of consideration. Also wanted to point out that on the table you'll see HCA as it's listed as a reserve fund instead of a stabilization fund. Since we didn't move the article to create a stabilization fund, we needed to allocate it to an account until the stabilization fund is able to be created. So that's kind of just an accounting change there.
Okay, great. First of all, I have to say, you look like Beyonce with the fan behind you and everything. Which I love. So I think the one thing that I think we as a board need to talk about is the conversation that happened earlier. The many people that gave public comment and have written us X number of many emails, giving us direction to draw down from the police budget and reinvest in these. So the conversations, like Melissa, the conversation you were having before about the library, for instance, or about the Council on Aging, those were all in a world where essentially most budgets are staying relatively where they were before, and everyone's taking a bit of a hit across the board. But what folks are calling for us to do is to take significant funding from the police line item and reallocate that to the what we call human services side, and toward affordable housing and toward other initiatives like that. And I'd like to see a budget that does that. I don't know what the word is.
I hope we talk to the chief before we go slashing the budget. I mean, what are the unintended consequences of that? For example, do you want to have the state police come in and investigate matters, state police that we don't control, that we have no input?
Bernard, your volume. Sorry.
Okay. I just said that we need, before we have that discussion, we need to get some input from the police chief so that we don't have unintended consequences from any budget cuts we make in that department. For example, do we want to have to call in the state police to deal with policing actions if we eliminate certain functions from the Brookline Police Department? We don't control them. We don't have any influence over how they operate, their rules of engagement, etc. So that's a conversation that requires more thought than just defund the police and shift money to social services.
I'll just speak a little bit. It was very I found a very powerful commentary, a period of time, and I think all of us should listen more than we speak about these things, and I'm certainly listening a lot. I guess the concern that I have, it seems fairly arbitrary, or there's no plan. We're talking about defunding and maybe a 10% cut or cuts, and I just think that we need to understand them. That was the whole idea behind me proposing an interim budget and working on that budget for the fall. I just think it doesn't do the town any service if we just make arbitrary reductions that we don't really understand. So, I think we have until November to do that. I guess the only thing I would say to that is, obviously we need to understand the school issue, because they start school in September, and they can't wait till November. So I do understand that, but I'm not sure, the urgency and to just cut something before July, on June 23rd, before we really fully understand the consequences. I understand that our police department's not perfect by any means. The police department system in which they work in is even less perfect. And, I support many of the ideas that have been discussed. And we'll talk about some next week in executive session on collective bargaining. I think it's really important that we have that discussion.
No, we also need to understand because the police are in the civil service system. So I think that there are things in the civil service system that we need to understand when we're looking at reorganizing, changing, reducing funding, etc.
Well, there's a lot of things to consider, and civil service is part of the system in which most municipalities operate. It's not required, by the way. You can opt out of civil service, but that's something that is going to require quite a bit of talk, and also collective bargaining with the union. So I guess my initial reaction is I think we want to really take a hard look at the social service agencies and make sure that we fully understand, and we'll communicate to you next week, what some of these relatively modest impacts are, or what they are missing from the budget. I guess that's all I could really be prepared to say this evening about that.
And just to remind the board that the advisory committee is planning on making a motion. They're actually debating it, and I'm sure as we speak, and that the board will then have that to react to as well.
So I personally would like to see the results of the task force that I hope gets appointed that would be able to shed a lot more information as to what a budget would look like depending on what kind of police force we want. But I do agree that it seems a little arbitrary at this point because we really need to understand the unintended consequences.
Another question, if I may. It's a little bit of a comment with a question attached. I think that perhaps a lot of people who have been following the discussions of our budget situation might be caught by surprise, excuse me, to look at the revenue part of the budget. In this sense, we all know that we're in a difficult year, but how many people know that we're in a difficult year in which the projected increase in revenues from property taxes is an increase of over 6%? And how many people know that we're in a difficult year in which the bottom line projected increase in revenues is over 4%? And I bring that up because I think it speaks to what BFAC, the Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee, was trying to get across. If we can be struggling to level fund existing services in a year in which we have 6% plus increase in revenues from property taxes and a bottom line increase of over 4% increase in revenues, then we've got a problem. We've got a baked in problem here that even those kinds of healthy increases in hard times aren't quite sufficient for us to keep everything at the level at which it was at the year before. And if Mel wants to comment as to whether I've misread those numbers, that's fine. I'm just reading them right off of the revenue part of the budget.
Well, the numbers don't lie, John, but they are very heavy on debt exclusions. So, we sort of look at our budget and operating and capital or debt and especially debt exclusions. So that a good portion of that tax rate or tax levy increase is the result of a voter approved debt exclusion.
Mm-hmm. Over $13 million is part of the debt exclusion for the increase in property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we have to property taxes, one source of our revenue, but we have had healthy local receipts and some state aid in the past, and they're plummeting. And while they're not as great a percentage of the budget, they still make up an important part of it. And so each one of those lines are down 13%. That's two line down 26%. It's a difficult problem. I think it's one of the frustrating things is that our community is not like, say, Cambridge, which has enormous amounts of commercial property and has not even, I'm not sure Cambridge has actually at its debt level, its debt ceiling. Mel is shaking his head. I think, they still have a ways to go, right? And because they can get money from their commercial development, and Newton is the same, I believe. So we're unfortunately disadvantaged significantly in that way. Mm-hmm. And, that's why we end up relying on ourselves and the property tax to make up the difference.
That I take John's point that I hope that after we pass this budget, which we'll need to do, this is a longer conversation, but that we'll have more conversations about revenue generation and some of the ideas that are out there to bring in more revenue.
I thought one point that John, I think one point that John is making that revenue from all sources is still going up. It's taken into consideration the decreases in certain revenue sources like local taxes, et cetera. So I guess really the question that I have is, what are the expenses that go up um, irrespective of anything that are sort of built into our expenditures that we have no control over. You're on mute.
The bonds that we sell and have to repay, pensions, health insurance costs, collective bargaining cost, although, you know, we're still have discretion as how many employees we have, but those who remain have to be paid by contract. So those are some that come to mind.
I think it'd be helpful to just get a sense of, you know, those items, because they are the things that we have no control over, irrespective of you know, whether our revenue is going up or down. So.
Sorry, may I just a couple more questions? Mel, I must say I'm impressed, and I just think I hope people recognize that this is not an easy exercise to go through, you know, line by line by line by line, and you know, find the savings that can get us to a break-even bottom line. And I do see that you've managed to spread it very much across most of the line items, most of the departments. And I'm just wondering if there's one thing that characterizes, I looked at all of these reductions sort of line item by line item. I thought, this isn't paper clips. What is it? You know, that what are we finding in each of these line items that we can actually squeeze some savings out of? And are most of them these positions that were not filled?
Correct. So I call this interim budget anyway a budget of opportunity, which, you know, I'm not totally proud of. It's not you know, we tried to take advantage of opportunities that we had, whether they were unfilled positions, brand new projects that we were, or programs that we're going to bring on, but we haven't implemented yet. The issue around furloughs and as Melissa mentioned, some of the functions the town has that aren't going to be fully back in play in fiscal 21. So we've tried to just take, you know, areas where we think we wouldn't see a lot of immediate reductions, and we had opportunities for savings. Melissa and Justin Casanova Davis know the budget better than the department heads, so they can't pull anything on them. So they've always have sort of a running list, and when we need it. And you know, Melissa, maybe you can speak a little bit about what we're looking. I mean, clearly, John, we stated, and I stated in my memo, we want to avoid layoffs of actual people as much as possible. So in order to do that, we had to reduce workforce and other accounts where we had the opportunities.
That can be kind of arbitrary, I assume, though, in terms of you
exactly. That's why I said I'm not 100% proud of it. It's not something that we kind of created. It's something that that was available, and we took advantage of it. And that's why I'm looking forward to a little bit more time in the fall where we can really understand not only the overall town revenues, but dive deeper into the details. And I know the advisory committee will help us do that. They always do.
And just to add in a couple of instances, you know, it's undoing some of the override funds that were, you know, provided to departments just a couple of years ago. So, you know, DPW capital outlay, that was kind of a big investment for the town. Same thing with building maintenance. And so it's kind of resetting those to the levels that happened before the override, which is unfortunate.
I promise this is my last question. I note that there's a cut to economic development line item. And I just, not only that item, but are there items such as that a cut might actually cost us money because we're not getting as much out of economic development as we might be getting? And I'm just thinking that may be one example.
I think it's kind of hard to make that judgment for a one-year cut or, you know, even temporary cut, but possibly. And, you know, I think that's why we're concerned that where the vacancies aren't necessarily where we need to cut. But we looked at things carefully and we don't see any immediate impacts like that, John. But I think if they stay for a long time, you'll absolutely see impacts, and the department heads can probably explain that a little bit more in detail.
Mhm. Anything else? I thought this was a very helpful discussion. Thank you. I thought this was a very helpful discussion. Thank you.
Can you tell us, Mel, I guess, what we can expect at our next meeting?
I think you're going to expect a vote where the advisory committee is coming. So, it's their budget. So that's probably more important than what I say at this point. And we will address some of the questions that were raised last week. But I will tell you right now that unless I'm understanding some goals or some more definitive objectives, I'm not going to be proposing defunding the police at this point right now. But, it's possible as we move into the fall and we have more information and ideas about how we can reallocate funding, that might be possible. But I think you're probably best to evaluate what the advisory committee is going to come up with tonight.
Can I hear from anyone else on the board about the diversity office and whether or not you would support adding staff there with all that we keep asking them to do?
Well, the problem, Raul, is where does the money come from? As it, when you add something, you have to subtract something else.
I understand how that works. Yes.
Yeah, very painful. And so,
I think we just need to look at it, from the standpoint of the next few months, as we get a better sense of what's happening, both
Right.
to the economy and in terms of this virus, make decisions, based on what makes sense at that point.
Just a quick thought. I think my comment on it would hinge somewhat on what are we asking them to do that they have told us they're unable to do at this point? Yeah. Because sometimes you're surprised at what people can do, and we have asked them to do a lot, but until I get some specifics as to what we've asked them to do that they're not able to do, I'm not sure that there's the grounds for putting more money there.
Yeah. And we've asked them to do a lot. Let me just assure you. And maybe we need to sort of bring you up to speed on some of that. But still, I think we need to really think this through, and see where we are in the next few months before we make any hard commitments.
I just want to say, Raul, that we will look at the questions you raised tonight. And, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say about them, but I promise you that I will consider them and on those budgets in the social service arena.
Appreciate
So
that.
I used to work for a diversity and inclusion office at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. I get how important that work is and that it often goes kind of unrecognized. So I would be in full support of putting another staff member. I think that that's been owed for a very long time, just as we've had to fight for nearly a decade to get a sustainability person. It's going to take some time, and we're going to have to, piece together the funds. And, we're just getting the budget that's revised like yesterday. It's difficult to go through and try to piece that money together this year.
And unfortunately, this whole town is understaffed. And it's amazing, what people can still do with so little resources. And it has nothing to do with COVID and emergency. I mean, this has always been the case. Any other discussion, comments? Okay, let's move on. I think this was a useful discussion, and let's move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next and the final matter on your agenda is the discussion and on procedures that the governor has created that would expedite outdoor seating. And Attorney Patty Correa from Town Council's office is here to review her draft regulations on these procedures on this restaurant seating. As I previously mentioned, we have dozens of restaurants that already have approved outdoor seating, and those are where people have many of these businesses own the sidewalk in front of their property, or perhaps they have enough room to acquire from the town or to get a license from the town. But there's so many more that do not, and I know that we really have to be proactive in order to provide space for them. But at least tonight, I believe we are going to seek your approval of these procedures, and also start to approve a couple of unique ones that are, or at least one tonight that's coming before you. So the Abbey restaurant, for example, already has some outdoor seating. They have a limited amount of space on the sidewalk, but an adjacent restaurant, the Dunkin' Donuts, has closed. And so they made a deal with Dunkin' Donuts that would allow them to use that adjacent property to expand their seating. So you're going to get some of those, and we want to approve those very quickly. And hopefully, allow those. I think I'm told that Washington Square Tavern may have a similar agreement with a hardware store next door. So we want to get the procedure up in place and start to approve the easy ones and begin to have a discussion about the hard choices that we're going to make, that you've seen in other communities. We've previewed this, where the town has to proactively expand the spaces for public gatherings or restaurant use in coordination with all the requirements, not only social distancing and the COVID requirements, but the ABCC has some specific requirements they're concerned about for restaurants that serve alcohol in this environment. So with that, I'm going to turn to Patty to go over the procedures, and then Patty, if you can help me figure out next steps after that.
Sure. So good evening, everybody, and welcome aboard, John. Patty Correa, First Assistant Town Council. So you may have read that on June 1st, the governor issued an order for phase 2 restaurant reopenings, attempting to streamline a process so that towns and cities can very quickly facilitate restaurants that want to open outside, which of course is safer for everybody. And so what the governor's order did is it allowed towns and cities to vote a process to do this, and then to approve licenses expansions after that. It took away, as part of the alcohol licensing, the state role, and put it squarely just on the local level to kind of expedite this process. It took away the requirement of abutters notices and hearings and so forth. You all may have read in the Globe yesterday that Boston's already approved hundreds of these as an administrative approval without sort of the more burdensome procedures under Chapter 138. So all of this is facilitated by this governor's order. The governor's order does require that the municipality approve the procedure first before it actually grants an extension of premises under this order. So that is why you have on the agenda tonight, first the procedure and then the Abbey to consider. And so what the procedure does, probably the item that's of most interest to you as a select board, is that it authorizes a procedure for approval by this town administrator or designee with one select board member, chair or designee. These can still go before you if you want that, but and I doubt we'll see anything like Boston saw with such a crush of applications, but it at least permits designated persons to handle these in the event there's a desire to do that. And it's got language where you prospectively are approving those applications that are done under this kind of reduced, simplified, quicker procedure, if that's what you want to use. And so I've been on some calls this week with, and last week with MMLA, Mass Municipal Lawyers Association attorneys, and Ralph Sacramone from the ABCC. And He said, that municipalities can use a lot of creativity to kind of come up with a procedure, and they'll support it. So there is a support at the state level for doing something like this to expedite these applications. And I see we have Kara and Todd on if there are more kind of policy oriented questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the procedure itself.
Well, I'll just comment. I've read through these, and I'm happy to see that we're trying to streamline this. Hopefully, this will lead to more streamlining of all of our license things. I often think that people are jumping through an awful lot of hoops, and there's a lot of information and pieces of paper, and I'm wondering whether in the future there's some way to streamline that as well. But I think it's important if restaurants are using outdoor space from other restaurants, that they have some type of agreement about how long that's going to last. Is it a month-to-month thing? What kind of notice? What happens if Dunkin' Donuts wants to go back into business tomorrow?
So
I didn't see that was dealt with in here, but maybe I'm wrong.
So let me try to address that. This is a streamlined procedure only for the duration of the COVID-19 emergency. And fortunately or unfortunately, the existing statutory scheme will go back into effect when this ends, and the licenses will shrink again when this ends. So it's really just a temporary measure to help businesses get through this period of time. And then for better or worse, the prior regime will resume. So I think we're just kind of looking to cover ourselves as a town. Is there permission from the abutter, in this case, Dunkin' Donuts, to use the property? Is there, health is going to, inspect all of these sites? There's a diagram. Is there the 6-foot spacing? Is there enough space to the path of travel on the sidewalk? All these things will be looked at by town staff as part of the process to make sure that it is a safe setup. But for better or worse, everything is going to revert back to what you've known in the past once this is over.
But just even in this situation, businesses are closing because they're affected by COVID, but then as things open up, they're going to be less affected. Are they going to be opening? And how is that going to affect the lessor-lessee relationship? So that's, what I was focusing on, just making sure that there's some scheme in place to make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, so we don't have contention between the parties at some point, because in this instance, for instance, Dunkin' Donuts wants to open next week. You know what I'm saying? So
wouldn't that be between Dunkin' Donuts and the Abbey? I mean,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Bernard.
Yeah, wouldn't that be between Dunkin' Donuts and the Abbey? I mean, presumably
Yes,
they have competent.
Yes, of course.
You
but I think we need to. Of course, it will be. But this kind of contention affects our community, the customers of these restaurants. They may be coming to the town for permissions on different things. I think it should be. I just want it to be spelled out. And, if it's a month-to-month thing, that's fine. And how much notice? I would think that if the other restaurant wants to actually use its property, and how much notice are they going to give to the person who is using it in the current situation? I just think those are sort of basic protections on both sides.
Okay, any other questions?
I was just gonna say that, in order to approve something like this for us, we have to have staff that we can trust. And I see Todd and Kara and Pat, and I know Tiffany is listed as part of this. And these are all really trustworthy people that have earned their reputations, and I trust to help move us through this. And And the other piece is that you have to have a good relationship with business owners. And that's something I've seen over the last, we just did our 13th virtual town hall with small businesses and nonprofits in Brookline. And we've got a good relationship there too. So I feel really confident in our ability, with our staff. And of course, there's still the sign off from the town administrator and a select board member that will do the right thing here.
Kara and others who want to chime in on this, just while you're here, I can't resist the temptation to ask you, is this going to actually reach that many of the restaurants that are really struggling and sort of at the brink right now? And if not, what other things can the town be doing that we haven't even, put on the table yet, that can help to bring back not just the restaurants, but the retail operations that are struggling? Because it seems to me we've got to start doing those things real fast. So if you have things that you've been kind of thinking of, and it's kind of on the back burner, but you're hoping to bring it to the front burner, I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. So I can just briefly say, and I'm going to watch Mel's face too, but I think we were planning a longer presentation, not tonight, but maybe next week or the following week. We do have a presentation from all the departments working together, as well as with private property owners, different configurations. We're already talking to the school committee with very specific ideas of spaces that could be used to accommodate outdoor customers. But the first step is we need to get out of our own way and remove the hurdles that the governor has given us the permission to remove so that we can get things going.
MassDOT has offered some technical assistance and maybe even some money. So I didn't know if you had a chance to reach out to Kate Victor at MassDOT to inquire about how we might be able to open up some more funds.
I
Sure, that's
personally
a
saw
question.
something that I saw something about that came across my desk today for the first time. I believe Alison Steinfeld sent it to me that there is a new funding program for that very purpose, and you can be sure we'll be pursuing that tomorrow.
Yeah, I think there was an earlier program for technical service, technical assistance. We have had a couple consultants in Brookline already step up to the plate and offer that service for free for our business community. So that is off and going, including some really incredible transportation consultant and a planning and urban design consultant. And just today, Lieutenant Governor Polito announced that also through MassDOT, there will be a grant that opens up in a couple weeks. The details are not announced yet, but it looks like that will help us do things like fund, asphalt ramps because DPW is offering to do that to make spaces handicap accessible and actually provide physical cost reduction. Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Any further discussion? Okay, so we have to, first of all, adopt the new procedures. I move that the select board adopt and approve the new procedures for facilitating outdoor restaurant seating. All in favor? Ms. Heller.
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton.
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez.
Aye.
Mr. Van Scoyac.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So next is a question of conditionally extending the outdoor seating area for the Abbey restaurant at 1657 Beacon Street upon meeting the new requirements that we just approved. Mr. Kleckner or someone want to? I'm sorry.
I can refer to Mr. Maloney is here, as well as Todd or Kara if they know more of the details, but you have the application in front of you. And I think it's a very straightforward and creative opportunity for the Abbey, who happens to have a vacant neighbor who is cooperative and willing to authorize them to use that property temporarily for seating for outdoor restaurant use. And I think it's a great idea. And I think we should support it. I might ask if there's any questions that you may have. The staff has reviewed it, tried to do it really quickly. But we fully support it. And it's not much. I mean, frankly, I think it's only a couple tables and chairs, right? So
I understand the owner is available to give us more information, more details.
Mr. Dowling is here, and I'm sorry for the late evening, Mr. Dowling, but if you wanted to, Devin, if you could allow him to speak, that'd be great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Of course.
I don't know if my video is working. I've never done a Zoom call before. I'm sorry.
Just the audio, but we can hear you fine.
Okay. Well, I mean, as you said, it's minuscule. It's pittance. It's a finger in the dike, really, to be honest. As a business owner, since March 16th, we've been hemorrhaging money, paying our rent, paying our health insurance, our liability insurance, paying two of our salaried employees. And just to be honest, I felt very disappointed as a business owner in the town that no one's really reached out apart from Tiffany at the licensing board is the only person who's any, and Lieutenant Hayes dropped in one day to see if we were okay, who's the town liquor officer. So, as Miss Heller said earlier, I feel like I've had to jump through hoops even to get to this stage where it seems like, as Mr. Kleckner said, it's a straightforward, it's two tables. It's not going to save my business, to be honest. It's not good. It's going to put a dent in an already huge debt that I have. It might employ one extra guy in the kitchen. So we'll go from 2 to 3 people employed full-time for a few weeks until the next phase, until we actually have bodies inside the restaurant, or limited bodies inside the restaurant. So I think we're not asking for much restaurants. We're not asking to break any rules. These are all existing parameters on the sidewalk. The sidewalk is the same. The landlord was the one who approached me saying, "Hey, they're gone. Their lease is over. They've quit their lease. Do you want the space?" First of all, I said I can't afford another restaurant. Second of all, I would love the space. So he's given me this opportunity to have 2 extra tables, basically, which is, in this day and age with the social distancing, it could be 2 people at the table, or it could be 4 people. But it's not really going to do much. It's more, I don't know, to be honest. I've already paid the liability insurance on it, which is $200. That's an awful lot of takeout and lunches with these margins at this day and age to pay back. To make that $200, I'll have to do in those 2 seats or 2 tables. I'll have to do well over $3,000 in business, which won't happen in this economic. Now, you drive by any of the restaurants, they're all empty. People are still scared, but it's a help. So I appreciate any help that the board can give, to be honest. And I really wanted just to thank publicly Tiffany Souza, who's been just amazing, amazing employee for the town, just so supportive to me as a business owner. So thank you.
Thank you. So any discussion or questions from the board before we move forward with this approval?
I just had a question. The item, the matter on the calendar refers to conditional. Is there any conditions, or was that anticipated that we might not have approved these procedures tonight? Is anybody aware of what conditions?
That was only conditional if they weren't able to complete their application and all the departments weren't able to turn around the reports in time, but everyone did a really incredible job pulling that together, and they have everything they need.
Great.
So we
So
can take
this
we can
could be
take the
approved.
condition off, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I move approval of extending the outdoor seating area for the Abbey Restaurant at 1657 Beacon Street upon meeting the new requirements that we just adopted. All in favor, Ms. Heller,
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez,
Aye.
Mr. Venskoyak,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. That concludes the business of this meeting. Unless anyone has any other questions or comments, we will end.
I was just gonna say good luck to Mr. Dowling and the folks at the Abbey. I'll be out there for some bolognese sometime very soon. Folks out there still watching and listening to us, you hear what he had to say. They need our support now more than ever, our small businesses. So please go out there and eat local, buy local, do what you can.
Yeah, I think I'll go over there and look at the menu and maybe do some takeout.
I just wanted to say that because of the way things went at the beginning of the meeting, there wasn't the appropriate moment for me to say that I very much appreciate being welcome to the board. And I also want to give a shout out to the person in the next corner over, Heather, and also to Eric, who were the other candidates in the recent contest for select board. And Heather has set a high water mark for others to strive to achieve in terms of her success in this past election. And it feels great to be serving on the same board with all of these colleagues, but also with this terrific staff that Brookline is blessed to have.
You will learn how blessed we are as you go through this next year and in the future. Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Devin.
Night.
Good night.
Good job on Zoom, everyone.
Good night.
Zoom by.
Zoom by.